Chapter 793. The night was silent. The next day, Tang In woke up to a series of rapid knocks on the door. He rubbed his forehead, looking a little tired. It was not because of the battle last night, but after seeing the eye of disaster and recalling the memories buried deep in his heart. Tang In found that he seemed to have insomnia, and his mind was full of thoughts. "What's going on, Tang In? You're taken? But it seems that you haven't done it for a long time. Is it because you've been holding it in? It can't be." Shaking his head, Tang In cleared the habitual thoughts in his mind and opened the door directly. Then he could not help but stop. The sounds in his ears were more mixed. One was the knocking on the door in the front yard, and the other was the lively noise near and far. The former was very clear because it was too close. The latter, however, seemed to have caused the entire Holy Light City to be in chaos. When it reached here, it was a little vague. Outside the door. "Strange, why is there no one? I clearly saw Mr. Claude come back." It was the voice of the Andy from last night. "Maybe he has already gone to the temple. Okay, let's hurry over. If we're late, we won't be able to squeeze in." All right, the knocking on the door disappeared, and the conversation gradually faded away. Twain thought about it for a moment and suddenly understood. Then he walked up the stairs to the second floor and came to the door. He paused and raised his hand. Dong, dong, dong. Tang In did not hide his footsteps. With Sylvia's cultivation, she could naturally detect his arrival. There was no response from inside, so Tang In took it as a tacit agreement and directly opened the door. Sylvia was still standing by the window with her back facing him. Her posture did not change, as if she had been like this all night last night. Shaking his head slightly, Tang In walked forward. The window faced west, so standing here, he could naturally see the full appearance of the temple in the distance at a glance. Even though Tang In had expected it, he could not help but be startled. Is it that exaggerated? After the demon's skull and God's judgment collided head-on last night, although Tang In and Sylvia were directly below, they only felt a little nauseous and were not injured. When the nauseating feeling subsided a little, the two of them naturally did not dare to stay and took advantage of this opportunity to quickly escape from the temple. In this way, even though they knew that the terrifying power of the demon's skull had far exceeded their expectations, and the damage it would bring to the temple would be very, very heavy. But no matter how they imagined it, they never expected the temple to be in such a miserable state. Dongfang Shuri had already peeked his head out. Under the bright light, the temple in the distance looked quieter than ever. Even the eternal morning bell didn't ring. As far as the eye could see, the periphery of the temple was still intact. However, in a large area near the eastern outer wall, which occupied about a quarter of the temple, there was nothing more than 3 meters tall. As such, there was no need to mention the solemn and elegant buildings of the past. As far as the eye could see, there were piles of rubble and debris that rose and fell continuously. At first glance, it looked like a barren hill in the wilderness, lifeless and desolate. Rubbing his nose, Tang In could not help but have a shocked expression on his face. He could imagine that the temple would be miserable, but he didn't expect it to be so thoroughly and in such a high level. He shifted his gaze. Unlike the lifeless interior of the temple, the surrounding outer wall seemed to be unusually lively. All the doors of the temple were closed, so at a glance, there was a surge of people, and a dense sea of people filled every corner of the temple's periphery. And further away, there were large groups of people rushing here. The scene was spectacular. Seeing this, Tang In undoubtedly found the source of the noise that he heard before. Shaking his head slightly, he thought that the ante just now should not be able to squeeze in, unlike Tang In, who had regained his senses and still had the leisure to think about other things. Sylvia, who stood quietly with a blank face, stared straight at the ruins of the temple without moving at all. Obviously, she was distracted. You don't have to think about it. You made the right choice. After a slight hesitation, Tang In looked at the gloomy and silent Sylvia, thought about it, and pointed at the ruins and said, "At least now, the piles of ruins are just ruins and not graves." That was the truth. Although he had underestimated the power of the demon's skull, if Xiao Weian had not thrown the skull as high as she could, It would not only be these ruins lying here, but also countless vengeful souls of the clergy. Therefore, it was no exaggeration to say that Xiao Weian had saved the northern shrine. Her eyes moved slightly, and Sylvia finally had a trace of vitality. Her gaze swept across the ruins, where many knights were constantly rummaging for something, and in the open space not far from them, there was a small group of silent and motionless figures. Those were the unlucky corpses of the clergy who were buried in the collapsed building last night. She opened her mouth, and her voice was extremely hoarse and dry. But there are still people who died. You're too greedy. Shaking his head, Tang In knew that with Sylvia's current state of mind, any words of consolation would be powerless and pale, so he simply did not say anything more and turned his gaze to the main entrance of the temple. There was some small chaos there, and the crowd gradually retreated like the ebbing tide. Squinting his eyes to take a closer look, it turned out that a large group of knights were doing their best to rush out of the main entrance, holding their spears horizontally and clearing out an empty space. Needless to say, after such a thing happened, the higher-ups of the temple had to give the believers an explanation no matter what. Sure enough. Haha, it's Byron. Oh, this is the rhythm of a bitter drama. A large group of figures walked out of the main entrance of the temple, but Tang In could barely recognize that it was Byron, who was being carried away in the center. However, due to the distance, Tang In could not see clearly and could not hear anything. But from the solemn posture and Byron's half-dead appearance, he could roughly guess the intentions of the higher-ups of the temple. It was nothing more than to shift the blame onto others and divert the hatred. No matter how arrogant the evil heretics were, how would they resist with their lives? Just as he was looking on in boredom, Tang In's long and narrow eyes suddenly narrowed, and he suddenly raised his head. In his line of sight, dozens of figures suddenly rose rapidly from the temple. After a pause, he could see that all of them had holy magic shields, which instantly separated and flew in all directions of the temple. In a short moment, they became inconspicuous little black dots in the sky. The mage regiment of the temple. Sylvia's gaze was dazed, and she subconsciously murmured in a low voice. Hearing this, Tang In could not help but raise his eyebrows. Oh, didn't they all die last night? After saying this, when Sylvia frowned and looked at him, he smacked his lips and sighed with emotion. Tiske, the Temple of Light is indeed the Temple of Light. This sigh was undoubtedly sincere. These mages who rose rapidly into the sky were naturally the first group of people who came to track Tang In and Sylvia. After all, there were many mages of the Temple of Light who were killed by the Demon Skull last night, but in just a short period of time, the Temple of Light had organized so many high-level mages to track them down again. With such a large amount of resources, apart from the Brand Palace, only the Temple of Light had such a foundation. After this brief interlude, Byron and the others who were at the main entrance had already returned to the temple. Only a few Knights of Light were still distributing sheets of white paper, as if something extraordinary was written on them. The surrounding believers were clearly frightened, and the atmosphere was somewhat strange. Seeing this, Tang In narrowed his eyes and did not say much. He just turned around and said, "Next should be the inspection of the city. Write a list of the items you need, and I will go to the magic equipment store. Also, get ready, we may leave in the evening." As Tang In expected, not long after the believers on the periphery slightly dispersed, the 4 doors of the temple opened wide, and a large number of clergymen came out and began to inspect the various areas of the city. However, this was destined to be futile. Tang In could easily block ordinary interrogations. As for detection and tracking magic, Sylvia, as a holy head knight, was the tip of the spear of the Temple of Light. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was very familiar with the various tracking techniques of the Temple of Light. Now, it was naturally easy for her to deal with them. Of course, the Temple of Light did not focus on the city. After all, it was already past midnight. Normal people would think that Tang In and Sylvia must have taken advantage of this time to escape. Therefore, After a slight inspection of the city, the Temple of Light placed most of their forces outside of Holy Light City. Needless to say, this was naturally useless. Even if the anxious higher-ups of the Temple of Light racked their brains, they would not have thought that Tang In and Sylvia were actually hiding quietly under their noses. What happened next went smoothly. For an entire day, the Temple of Light mages flew back and forth a few times within 100 miles of Holy Light City, until their eyes were sore and their magic was exhausted. They had no choice but to land on the ground, but they still did not find anything. At the same time, the large group of knights sent out to sweep the area almost turned the surrounding plains upside down, but they could not find any trace of them. Such an outcome undoubtedly caused Byron and the others to go crazy. Tang In and Sylvia, these two people had to be killed now, or they would be in big trouble. There was no need to mention Sylvia. Byron and the others were very clear about her temperament. When she exposed the matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild, the anger of the believers would be enough to destroy the position they had painstakingly climbed to over the decades. As for Tang In, there was no need to mention him. The terrifying attack of the demonic skull had destroyed a small part of the Temple of Light. This kind of responsibility could only be shouldered by Tang In's corpse, or by the higher-ups like them. It was impossible to find a scapegoat. Moreover, there was also the Eye of Disaster, which was related to the future of the Temple of Light, and the concrete evidence of the collusion between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild, regardless of which one was used, let alone these bishops. Even a colossus like the Temple of Light would not be able to withstand such an impact. It could be said that although the matter had not yet reached its climax, Byron and the others could already see their miserable end. Just as the Temple of Light was at a loss, and the intensive search from before was gradually relaxing, a carriage for a family visit left Holy Light City in the evening. It had to be said that the Temple of Light's decision to not erect a wall around Holy Light City in order to save face was really terrible. This could certainly establish a good image in front of the believers, but on the other hand, it also greatly increased the difficulty of sealing off the city. At the same time, it also increased the chances of those with bad intentions to escape. In this regard, Tang In, who was driving the carriage away, only had one comment. Don't be pretentious, or you'll be struck by lightning. Late at night, 100 miles away from Holy Light City, on the vast plains, a few hoarse neighs broke the silence of the night. Then, the carriage in the name of a family visit slowly came to a stop. Looking left and right, the coachman with slightly white sideburns and a face full of wrinkles, who was Tang In, put down the reins in his hand and knocked on the carriage. He had a teasing expression on his face. "Old woman, you've walked so far. Don't you want to come out and relieve yourself?" Whoosh! The door opened, revealing the expressionless face of an old woman. She glanced at Tang In. Then, with nimble movements that were seriously inconsistent with her age, she lightly jumped to the ground. Needless to say, this was naturally Sylvia. There's no need to look. If we can still meet a knight or a mage who has been running around for an entire day, then it's not a shame to be caught. Tang In calmly walked out of the carriage and looked at Sylvia, who was still looking around, with a relaxed expression. "Don't worry. Trust me. I'm a professional." Paused for a while, he pointed to the blurry, continuous mountains on the right in the distance. "Although I don't know what you can do next, but go in that direction. After passing through the mountains, there'll be a small town. It's very quiet, and not many people will pass by. It's suitable for you to stay temporarily." Withdrawing her vigilant gaze, Sylvia pursed her lips and gently nodded. "Thank you." With her current state of mind, she really needed such a quiet place to adjust her state of mind. Whether or not she would go to that small town in the future, Tang In's intentions were always sincere. "It's nothing, I just said it casually." Tang In waved his hand dismissively. As if he thought of something, the corners of his mouth could not help but rise. "But your future days won't be easy. Ha! You used to help the Temple of Light hunt down evil heretics, but one day, you'll be hunted down by the Temple of Light as an enemy. Haha. Sorry, I didn't mean to expose your scars, but I think this matter is quite interesting." Sylvia was silent. This matter was more than interesting. It was simply funny. If someone had told her before that one day her faith would be shaken and she would be hunted down by the Temple of Light, she would have thought it was a ridiculous joke. But now, this joke had become true. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little awkward, Tang In simply waved his hand and said casually, "Well, we're not friends, and we can't act out a sad farewell. Let's just say goodbye and go home. What's your condition?" At this time, Sylvia suddenly asked. Tang In was startled and immediately understood. He laughed and shook his head. "Ha, you don't have to be in such a hurry to repay the debt. Well, this is a condition to be a holy head knight. Of course I have to take some time to think about it." Sylvia heard this and could not help but frown. It was not that she wanted to go back on her word, but with her character, not to mention that she had already made an oath to the God of Light. Even if it was an empty promise, she would still do it. She just felt that she had agreed too hastily and did not set a time limit or anything. Probably seeing Sylvia's thoughts, Tang In shrugged and smiled. "Don't worry. If there are no accidents, we will definitely meet again, and we'll talk about it then. Well, but for this promise, you have to take good care of your little life, and don't be stupid again. How to say it, there are still many good people in this world, but there are undoubtedly more selfish people." At this point, Tang In paused, and, after thinking for a moment, he reached into his bosom and took out a piece of white paper. His fingers dexterously twirled, and in a flash he folded it into the shape of a small bird and handed it over. "In any case, we have known each other for a long time, so before I leave, let me give you a gift. This thing is called a paper crane in my hometown, and it doesn't have any special meaning. Well, the special meaning is inside. You can open it after I leave." Seeing this, Sylvia's eyes flashed and immediately stepped forward, took the paper crane, and bowed her head to play with it. Then she nodded, as if she had accepted this somewhat strange gift. "Well then, goodbye." Clapping his hands twice, Tang In turned and walked towards the carriage. But at this moment, wait! Turning her head in surprise, Sylvia lowered her head and seemed to be thinking about something. Then she seemed to have made up her mind, raised her head, and slightly raised the corners of her mouth. Her valiant face instantly softened, revealing a somewhat bright and somewhat tranquil smile. "Thank you. Can I express my gratitude?" Perhaps because the temperament was too different, Tang In looked at Sylvia's rare smile and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he touched his nose. "That you don't have to be so polite." Before his voice died away, Sylvia opened her arms slightly and slowly stepped forward. Seeing this, Tang In's body instantly tensed up, and his expression was vigilant. It was no wonder that he had such a reaction. It must be known that with the strength and relationship between the two of them, this distance was already quite dangerous. The so-called life and death could be decided in seconds, and in this situation, it was not a joke. It was precisely because of this that when Tang In handed out the paper crane, he tried to stretch his arm as far as possible, and kept at least a distance of 3 steps between the two of them. But now that Sylvia took a step forward, there was no doubt that she had entered an extremely dangerous area. However, after his body tensed up, Tang In couldn't help but have some doubts in his eyes. Sylvia took that step slowly, which showed that she was undoubtedly aware of the situation, so she was silently explaining something. Coupled with her open arms, it was a move that completely exposed her vulnerable parts. This didn't seem like she had ulterior motives, but more like taking another step forward. Under Tang In's stunned expression, Sylvia slightly closed her arms and gently hugged Tang In. Although because of the disguise, the scene of an old couple hugging looked more heartwarming. But Tang In, who was in the middle of it, could clearly feel the seductive and devilish curves under the thin fabric. Of course, the current Tang In was completely unable to enjoy such a scene. His expression was blank, and his arms were stiff and hanging down. What the F***CK? What's going on? The hug was very short, only about 3 seconds. Letting go of her arms, Sylvia stepped back. The smile on her face had disappeared, but she seemed to feel more relaxed. She bowed and said, "Goodbye, Your Excellency Tang In." After saying that, She simply turned around and ran quickly toward the mountain range on the right. Soon, she disappeared into the dark night, leaving Tang In standing there in a daze. He didn't know if he was at a loss or if he was recalling the feeling just now. However, after Sylvia's figure completely disappeared, Tang In's dazed expression suddenly disappeared, and he chuckled. Haha, that's a good method, but you're underestimating me too much. Shaking his head, he walked straight to the front of the carriage, bent down, and reached out to feel the inside of the wheel. He took out an oval object, tossed it, and put it into his arms. You can confirm whether the eye of disaster is on me with a hug. Haha, don't play tricks. That's really not what you're good at. Having big breasts and no brain is your advantage. TSK, they're really big. Chapter 794. A few days later, in the system space. Ding. Long-term mission, Light's Dusk, stage reward. Experience points gained, 50 points. Experience points gained, 200 points. Experience points gained. A series of system chimes rang out. Tang In stood rooted to the ground as he watched his experience points, which had remained motionless for a long time, jump to nearly 7,000 in an instant. He couldn't help but rub his nose and murmur, "What the F*** CK? Is this really casting a long line to catch a big fish?" Tang In had now returned to Hanshui City, but it was late at night when he arrived, so he was not in a hurry to gather David and the others. Instead, he simply closed the door and rested, entering the system space that he had not entered for a few days. Therefore, this scene appeared before him. As I said, you're lucky. Long-term missions are basically missions that give you experience points. The old butler, who was leisurely reading a book, answered without raising his head. Tang In nodded, indicating that he understood. Then he looked at his experience points that had stopped climbing and smacked his lips. What a pity it only rose so little. This idea was undoubtedly a little greedy. After all, the experience points in the system had hardly touched before this. The old butler looked up with a faint smile. With your achievements in the Northern Temple, it's actually not a problem for you to rise by one level. It's just, do you dare to? Tang In was stunned. After he reacted, he couldn't help but grin and shift his gaze. Well, old butler, help me check if there's any information on the Eye of Disaster in the system. Of course, this was to change the topic, but Tang In really didn't dare to level up. The reason was very simple. In this trip to the temple, if there was any action that dealt the greatest blow to the temple, it was undoubtedly the demon skull. It was just that the one who threw the demon skull in the end was Sylvia, not Tang In. As a result, Tang In's role in this change from the mastermind to an accomplice, and the experience points he received naturally decreased by a lot. Of course, this couldn't be helped. Even if Tang In were to go back to that time and choose again, he would still give the demon skull to Sylvia. After all, the increase in experience points was something to be happy about. However, if his HP and chi were to increase wildly, that would be fatal. The old butler didn't linger on this topic. With a wave of his hand, a screen of light appeared. The words of the brand, the Northern Wilderness, and some other strange words and symbols rolled down like a waterfall. After a short moment, hundreds of information about the Eye of Disaster appeared on the screen, just like a computer index in the modern world. Tang In was naturally not surprised by this. In his heart, the system was more or less the symbol of a smart computer. He stepped forward and clicked on each message one by one. Soon, he eliminated some bards that were just gimmicks and had no actual content. A moment later, Tang In's gaze was fixed on a piece of information written in the Northern Wilderness. Glancing at the beginning of the message, Tang In understood that the author was a sorcerer from the Northern Wilderness. As mentioned earlier, the people of the Northern Wilderness had an almost natural shortcoming when it came to cultivating chi and magic. Therefore, the direction of their research seemed to be mostly strange, and they were probably planning to win by surprise. In this way, things like the Eye of Disaster, which had a stronger evil aura, would naturally enter their line of sight. In fact, this was precisely the case. The introduction of the Eye of Disaster was very detailed. In addition to what Sylvia had said earlier, Tang In also knew that the Eye of Disaster had once fallen into the hands of the people of the northern wilderness. However, after circulating for 100 years, it was finally taken away by the temple. Perhaps it was this experience that allowed this sorcerer from a northern wilderness to have a certain understanding of the Eye of Disaster. According to him, although the Eye of Disaster was naturally formed, it could actually be controlled. A person from a northern wilderness had once done this and caused a huge commotion. There was no need to elaborate on the details. It was roughly that person who used the Eye of Disaster to control countless barbarians and wanted to revitalize his tribe in this way. However, before he could finish accumulating power, the matter was exposed and attracted many powerhouses. Although the Eye of Disaster was terrifying, it did not have any actual combat power. In the end, that person was killed by a powerhouse in an instant. The large force that he had gathered and controlled was not put to use at all and immediately collapsed. Even those barbarians who had woken up in anger turned around and destroyed that person's tribe. It was a pity that this good fortune had turned into a sharp sword hanging over one's head and brought about a disaster. It was also because of this that the method to control the Eye of Disaster was lost. The powerhouse who had attacked thought that he could control something that a small fry could. However, the result was not so. After this incident, the Eye of Disaster did not seem to give him face. No matter how many methods were used and how many powerhouses were manipulated, the result was that apart from increasing the number of people who had lost their minds, there was nothing else. Seeing this, Tang In could not help but frown. Damn, it turns out that we've invited an ancestor who can only be seen but can't be used. He shook his head speechlessly. Old butler, do you have any suggestions? However, the old butler, who had always been omnipotent, shook his head this time, indicating that he did not know. Such a straightforward attitude naturally could not convince Tang In. Moreover, the old butler had a record of not saying anything even though he clearly knew something. He was only waiting for Tang In to suffer a great loss before coming out to make some sarcastic remarks. The old butler had tried this method many times. For example, when they first met, the old butler had concealed the whereabouts of Sessman when he left Little Rock Village. As a result, Tang In went in the opposite direction to Lion City. Stop fooling around, old butler. If you know something, hurry up and say it. Closing the book, the old butler glanced at Tang In with a calm expression. I'm not an encyclopedia, aren't you? The next moment, Tang In was kicked out of the system space. Damn, what do you mean? If you don't know, just say it. If you don't tell me, how would I know that you don't know? Tang In mumbled as he opened his eyes and tossed around on the bed. However, since he already knew the old butler's clear attitude, even if he knew the method to control the Eye of Disaster, Tang In admitted that he did not have the ability to force him to tell him. He could only shake his head helplessly, take out the Eye of Disaster, and raise it above his head. My head hurts. How do I control it? Open sesame? The Heavenly King covers the Earth Tiger, chicken stewed with mushrooms. Black fertilizer makes it black. Gray fertilizer makes it work. Black fertilizer makes it work. Black, black, black your uncle. The incantation failed. Tang In rolled his eyes and quickly thought of another idea. He flipped his hand and flashed a dagger. A moment later, Tang In raised his bleeding finger and watched expressionlessly as the drops of blood smoothly made half a circle on the smooth surface of the Eye of Disaster and fell without any reluctance. The blood sacrifice failed. He exhaled and gritted his teeth. Oh, look at my bad temper. I can't even deal with a little guy like you. Come on. I'd like to see how long you can last after a night of conflict. The next morning, David, who had learned that Tang In had returned, rushed over. After knocking on the door, David did not stand on ceremony and said directly, Boss, we've successfully taken over 30 bounty hunter branches. The rest are also being destroyed. I believe that it won't be long before the Bounty Hunter Guild is eliminated from the North. Quietly taking over 30 bounty hunter guilds was naturally an impressive result. However, if this number was compared to the overall scale of the Bounty Hunter Guild in the North, it was actually nothing. However, This was also the limit of what David and the others could take. The reason was not that they did not have enough financial resources, but that they did not have enough manpower. It was impossible for David and the others to take charge of these guilds openly. Firstly, it was for safety reasons to prevent them from being wiped out. Secondly, doing so would also restrict the activity space of the gray space. The gains did not make up for the losses. In fact, the people in charge of the various branch guilds were now people from a secret organization, and even so, they were still stretched thin. After all, those with leadership skills were popular everywhere. Tang and could not cut off the intelligence source of the secret organization in order to form an assassin organization. That would undoubtedly be the most foolish thing to do. It was precisely because of these reasons that David and the others had to work hard to reluctantly take over these 30 branch guilds. Of course, according to the Gray Space's style, even if they could not use it, they would find a way to destroy it so that others would not use it. Therefore, after having the exact addresses of the various guilds in their hands, David and the others had recently done a lot of dirty things. Many branch guilds were also destroyed because of them. It was worth mentioning that David and the others had taken action against the Bounty Hunter Guild very smoothly this time and almost did not encounter any trouble. The reason for this was simple. Before Tang In and the others went to the Northern Temple, there were still 3 high-ranking members in the guild. But now, apart from the fake Tang Un, there was not even a single high-ranking member in such a large guild. In this way, without a leader, the scattered guilds naturally could not pose any threat to David and the others. Boss, you weren't here, so you don't know how glorious we were a few days ago. Going thousands of miles around, slaughtering one side, huh? Even a bounty hunter guild is too weak. They have no ability to resist at all. It's not very satisfying. Obviously, David was very excited to be able to beat the bounty hunter guild, which had hundreds of years of history, into a sorry state with just a few dozen people. However, it was precisely because of this that David did not notice that Tang In, who was sitting opposite him, was rubbing his eyebrows as he listened with a sleepy face. Finally, he waved his hand and interrupted. "Okay, In, wait a minute." Just as he was talking excitedly, David saw Tang In suddenly turn around and enter the house. He could not help but be stunned. By the time he came back to his senses, Tang In had already appeared in front of the door again and casually threw a book over. "This is evidence of the transaction between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. I don't need to teach you the specifics, right? In, that's all for now." With a wave of his hand, the door closed with a bang. Only a low murmur could be heard coming from inside. "I'm going to go all out with you. I don't believe I can't deal with you. Dead fish eyes. Dead fish eyes?" David could not help but scratch his head when he heard this, his face full of confusion. At this moment, the door creaked open again. Tang In, who had stepped out, came face to face with David and was stunned. Why are you still here?" That's right. You guys have done well this time. Operate the 30 branch guilds as you did before. Once I've thought things through, we'll form our own assassin organization. Also, since you haven't left yet, I'm a little hungry. Get the kitchen to send me something to eat. That's all, bye." With a bang, the door closed again. "Okay, boss." David opened his mouth and left with a baffled expression. "What's going on?" David, who was full of doubts, naturally did not know that Tang In was going all out with the Eye of Disaster and was bent on finding a way to control it. Of course, it had to be said that the Eye of Disaster was also valued so much. If this thing was used properly, it would be an out-and-out killer weapon. In the next few days, just as Tang In was about to go crazy because of the Eye of Disaster, David and Harry did not let him down. The evidence of the transaction that was casually thrown out was fermenting the power that made the entire Brand Empire tremble. It had been an eventful period recently, especially for the Temple of Light, which was even more unlucky. The falsification of miracles, the corruption of many churches, the exposure of the ugly faces of many clergymen, and so on. A series of events continued to test the tolerance of the believers time and time again. And the faith that was once holy and flawless in the hearts of the believers was now shrouded in layers of black gauze. It could not be seen clearly, but the feeling in the bottom of their hearts was probably hazy. At this time, a new round of negative news about the Temple of Light began to erupt one after another everywhere. At first, the news was that a clergyman had hired a murderer, and the person who was killed was a well-known scholar. The general content of the rumor was that this scholar had said some bad things about the Temple of Light. In fact, these so-called bad things were just some practical opinions about the rights of churches. As everyone knew, the rights of churches everywhere were considerable. It was not an exaggeration to say that even if the businesses of several nobles were tied together, they would definitely not be comparable. Not to mention other things, just the area of fertile land occupied by churches in various places was enough to kill the local nobles in seconds. There were all kinds of rights and privileges, and they actually existed. It was just that the temple had always been secretive about it, so it was not known to ordinary people. But now that this situation had been exposed by the mouth of this more pragmatic scholar, it was undoubtedly like poking a hornet's nest. The reason was very simple. This was like giving alms to a homeless person. If you knew that the homeless person was extremely wealthy and had a lot of lovers, would you still give the money in your hands to the homeless person? Of course, this analogy was not suitable. Giving money to a religion and giving alms to the streets were two completely different concepts. But it must be said that some of the ideas of the people were faintly similar. The spirit of giving was selfless and great. It should not be changed by any factors. Therefore, it was not impossible to rule out that some fanatics would be generous even if they knew the truth about the church. But before the faith was fully formed, the situation that the believers saw was mostly benevolent clergymen, simple clothing, coarse food, and living conditions. This was the consistent appearance of the temple, but the believers did not know. They had faintly formed an inherent idea, because of these appearances, that was, the conditions of the temple were not good, and the clergymen were very poor. It was because of these preconceived impressions that they chose to give their small amount of food and money to the temple. It was wishful thinking that they could change the status quo through these meager efforts. But now, the pragmatic remarks of this great scholar had bloody unraveled this layer of appearance. In this way, regardless of whether the temple had the intention to promote this appearance as a vested interest, they would never allow anyone to destroy this appearance. Therefore, the local police department said that the death of this great scholar was an accident. But now that the old matter was brought up again, someone found the suspicious point of this accident. And more importantly, the assassin who assassinated the great scholar now took the initiative to come forward and confess all of this, saying that he was instructed by the Temple of Light. Of course, life was not a fairy tale. Behind the stunned believers, it was not the assassin who was condemned by his conscience who took the initiative to come forward, but the figures of David and the others who were moving around. It was a simple method. When David and the others sat in the assassin's house and asked him to choose whether to protect himself or protect his wife and several children, all of this happened naturally. It was a little despicable, but justice was never the norm in the gray space. As if a fuse had been lit, what happened next was even more shocking. If the incident of the great scholar was said to have been refuted by the churches involved, then the various cases of hiring assassins to kill people, which happened to be reasonable and well-founded, silenced all the churches. By now, if they still could not see that these things were directed directly at the Temple of Light, then the bishops of the churches would not be able to stay in the church anymore. Sure enough, after a few days of brewing, the hammer was heavily smashed. The Temple of Light secretly colluded with the Bounty Hunter Guild, eliminated dissidents, and killed countless people. This was the strategy of David and the others. Step by step, they first selected a few more influential cases. Whether the world believed it or not, they first attracted a lot of attention and then naturally led to the final result, which would be the final nail in the coffin. To be honest, except for the fanatics who were still shouting loudly, most of the ordinary believers were almost mentally numb at this time. Emotionally, of course, they were willing to believe the Temple of Light. But rationally speaking, the evidence of the divine temple's shady dealings made them hesitate. This kind of feeling was probably like what the famous police chief of Mountain Stream City said in private. If the evidence was not wrong, then there was a problem with the facts. And if there was a problem with the facts, then it was a big problem whether they wanted to save face or not. The facts proved that the Temple of Light had long been shameless. When the matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild was exposed, the numb hearts of the believers completely collapsed. They could not wait to see the response of the temple. Boundless anger instantly erupted everywhere in the northern part brand. There was a saying that went, "The more you love, the more you hate." The belief of a lifetime collapsed in one day. The mentality of the believers could no longer be simply described with the word hate. Their attitude towards the temple had become abnormal and perverted. At this point, the unshakable power of the Temple of Light in the north was swayed by the wind and rain. Chapter 795. The reputation of the northern town did not matter, as long as one knew that it was located in a remote area with few people. Other than the local residents and some wandering bards who happened to wander here, there were basically no strangers who would come here. It was precisely because of this that even though the straight-line distance between the town and the northern temple was only 100 miles, it was almost the closest gathering place to the temple. However, the many storms about the temple and the outside world still did not affect the peace here. However, this morning, the town welcomed an unfamiliar face. With a handsome face and a warm smile, coupled with the holy armor, the whole person looked extremely heroic and tall. With such a dress, even if the town residents did not see the world, they knew that a great person had come. The attitude of this great person seemed to be very gentle, but the residents here naturally did not dare to come up to talk to him. Moreover, the purpose of this great person was very clear. He nodded and smiled at passers-by and passed through most of the town, arriving in front of an ordinary house on the north side. He looked around and raised his hand. Knock, knock, knock. Creak. The wooden door of the house was not tightly shut. After a few knocks, it opened by itself. The great person raised his eyebrows and was about to step in. However, at this moment, suddenly his foot hung in the air. His expression changed, and he said hurriedly, "Don't misunderstand. It's me." The half-closed wooden door was fully opened, and a small courtyard appeared in sight. On the steps in front of the house, a white-haired old woman was half-sitting. Her expression was indifferent, and her eyes were narrowed. There was a persistent fighting spirit in her eyes that was seriously inconsistent with her identity. The explanation of identity did not have any obvious effect. On the contrary, the fighting spirit around the old woman rose crazily and covered the whole courtyard in a short time. The warm light seemed to have lost its temperature and gradually became cold. After a pause, looking at the fighting spirit that had not diminished at all, the great person realized something and raised his hands. "Well, I came alone." After looking at each other for a moment, the old woman's eyes drooped slightly, and the fighting spirit around her disappeared instantly. She frowned slightly. "How did you know I was here? Owens?" The great person, Owens, did not immediately answer the question. Instead, he first let out a long sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Others did not know, but Owens knew very well how terrifying the strength of this seemingly old woman in front of him was. Everything else aside, if this old woman had chosen to attack him, then the only thing he could do was to turn around and run. He waved his hand in greeting and smiled warmly again. "Hi, Sylvia. We've known each other for many years. I don't expect you to pass me a cup of tea, but at least let me in first." Owens paused and looked at Sylvia, who was disguised as an old woman, frowning. His eyelids twitched, and he hurriedly spread out his hands to stop her. All right. I'm really scared of you. I'll come myself." After crossing the threshold, Owens stopped talking nonsense and said directly, "It's really good to use this place as a hiding place. It's very quiet, and it's not easy to be noticed. But, to boast, there are many people who understand your character, but I'm definitely one of the top few." Regarding the matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild, the Temple of Light's treatment of you was indeed very unethical. But I know that you won't be disheartened and betray the temple. On the contrary, you'll only think about how to get the temple of light back on the right path, right? So I concluded that you can't be too far away from the temple of light. You should be silently waiting for an opportunity nearby. Sylvia pursed her lips and remained silent. And if she didn't deny it, it meant that she admitted it. As for how I know you're hiding here, Owen shook his head and sighed while paused for a while. Actually, I just deliberately collected information around the Temple of Light. But you, Xiao Weian, always abhors evil as if it were your enemy. You've only been here for a few days, but you've already dealt with a bully in the town. There was no doubt that everything was clear at this point. Sylvia came to this remote town to hide. She shouldn't have made any movements, but her abhorrence of evil made her take action and teach the bully a lesson. And it was this inconspicuous little matter that made the meticulous Owens quickly find her. To a certain extent, Owens wasn't boasting before. He really did know Sylvia very well. Of course, these are just guesses. You have to know that the moment I entered the door, I thought I came here for nothing. Stepping closer, Owens couldn't help but squint his eyes and look up and down at Sylvia's disguise, especially her face. He couldn't help but click his tongue in wonder. This disguise is simply amazing. If it wasn't for the battle just now, I would have thought I recognized the wrong person. When did you know such an expert? He subconsciously touched the wrinkles on his face and was startled for a moment before returning to normal. Sylvia didn't intend to explain and just said lightly, "Why are you still looking for me? I'm now a depraved, wanted criminal who colluded with evil heresy. If I'm not wrong, the Temple of Light is now wantonly hunting me down. Aren't you afraid of being implicated by me?" Owens couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this. You already know? Humph. With a light snort, Sylvia flipped her right hand and threw over a bird. Owens raised his hand in astonishment and took the folded paper that had wings and was shaped like a bird. His face suddenly became strange. "Hey, I really didn't see it. Sylvia, when did you have this skill? How did you fold it into the shape of a bird? It's very delicate. This is a paper crane." Sylvia subconsciously corrected him, but then frowned and impatiently waved her hand. "Open it." "Okay, but how do I open it?" Judging from the paper traces, this paper crane seemed to have been opened and folded many times. So before Owens finished his distressed words, the paper crane in his hand had naturally been opened and scattered into a piece of black and white paper. The content of the paper was very simple. It was a wanted order from the Temple of Light, but written at the beginning was the wanted target, Sylvia. These 3 words were enough to stun the world. Who was Sylvia? She was the martial arts genius of the Temple of Light in 100 years. She was the flower of the knights that many men and women adored. She was the holy head knight who killed countless evil heretics. But now, such a meritorious and glorious Sylvia had become a criminal who colluded with evil heretics and directly caused the destruction of a large area of the Temple of Light. After a moment of silence, Owens suddenly thought of something, and his face was full of surprise. "At that time, you didn't leave Holy Light City?" This wanted order was issued on the spot the day after the destruction of the Temple of Light, and there were not many of them. It was impossible to have it outside of Holy Light City. This also meant that when the Temple of Light was preparing to conduct a large-scale search, the target of the search was actually right under their noses. "I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I really can't believe it." Repeating himself 3 times, Owens kept shaking his head, looking at Xiao Weian with eyes full of shock and surprise. "I just realized that I didn't know you very well. It wasn't my idea." After a brief explanation, Sylvia looked a little impatient. "You haven't answered my question. Why did you come here to find me? If it wasn't you, then it could only be Tang Yin." Owens suppressed the speculation in his heart and said, "The reason is very simple. Before, I didn't think highly of your attitude towards the Temple of Light, but now I can't stand the way the Temple of Light treated you. So, I decided to help you." "Help me?" Sylvia raised her eyebrows and looked up. "What can you help me with?" What's with your suspicious attitude? Come on, I'm risking my life to help you. A friend, okay? Even if I'm weak, you shouldn't leave me with no face." Holding his forehead, Owens's face was full of helplessness. And at least I could be a spy and inform you, right? Hearing this, Sylvia looked at Owens and pondered for a moment. Have you thought about it? Of course. Okay, I believe you. Sylvia nodded. But what news can you bring me? I'm a holy head knight, and I'm quite popular. Naturally, I'm well informed. Well, I'll talk about the recent situation of the Temple of Light. You don't know how chaotic the Temple of Light and Light City have been these days. Sylvia had been in the town, sorting out her thoughts for the past few days. Naturally, she didn't know the situation outside. Now, from Owens, she learned about the difficult situation the Temple of Light was in. Let's not talk about other places for the time being. Take Owens's actual situation as an example. Even Holy Light City, which had the strongest faith, was now in turmoil. Some believers gathered day and night outside the Temple of Light with scandals one after another, demanding an explanation from the higher-ups of the Temple of Light. Some were so disheartened and disappointed with the temple that they directly moved out of Light City with their families. Some were even more extreme. They quarreled, fought with the zealots who defended the Temple of Light in the city. Sigh, apart from collecting news about you, I didn't have a moment of leisure these past few days. I kept bringing a large group of knights out to stop fights. Do you remember Old Bolton from the bakery in the city? His ancestors lived in Light City for several generations, and his whole family were faithful believers of the Temple of Light. But this time, he fought with his son, Old Bolton, because of the Temple of Light. By the time we rushed over, both of them were already bleeding from head to toe. We couldn't even pull them apart. In the end, Old Bolton pulled me away. He kept asking me loudly if the Bounty Hunter Guild was fake and if it was a rumor made up by someone else. I don't know how to describe that expression, but I'll never forget it in my life. But how do you want me to answer? If I said no, I could comfort him, but I couldn't explain his doubts, and I couldn't convince myself either. Say yes. How could I bear it? In the end, I could only let him pull me. She let out a long breath. Phew, how should I put it? Actually, I didn't come here to help you, but also for myself. Because at least this way, I could be a little more at ease. I didn't think highly of you before because I thought that the Temple of Light could still be saved. But now, it's hard to say. But there's one thing I can be sure of, and that is, if the Temple of Light continues like this, it will collapse. Amidst Owen's lonely sigh, Sylvia couldn't help but stare blankly, speechless for a long time. She naturally knew about the Bounty Hunter Guild. Looking at the wanted poster these past few days, sometimes she would ruthlessly think of directly exposing this matter and see how the Temple of Light would explain it to the tens of millions of believers, of course. This was just a thought. After all, she was a member of the Temple of Light and naturally understood the principle of not washing one's dirty linen in public. Therefore, she was more inclined to report this matter to the headquarters and resolve it internally. But she didn't expect that someone would be one step ahead of her and directly expose this matter. Moreover, it was reasonable and convincing at the same time. Sylvia didn't expect that this matter would lead to such a large-scale turmoil, far exceeding her expectations. It even gave people the feeling that the Temple of Light was like an assassin or a thief, to the point where everyone wanted to beat them up. Taking a deep breath, Sylvia pursed her lips as if she had decided on something, and said slowly, "Tell me, if I stand up now and announce that the matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild is true, what kind of result will there be?" Don't joke around. It's already chaotic enough now. Are you serious? Looking at Sylvia's familiar persistent gaze, Owens was a little dumbfounded. He opened his mouth and wanted to directly deny it, but in the end, he swallowed it back and frowned. Reason. After staying in this quiet town for a few days, Sylvia obviously used this opportunity to figure out a lot of things. Hearing this, she calmly explained, "We all know that the matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild is true, and those who hired the killers shouldn't be fake. This matter can't be hidden just by concealing it, so why don't we choose to expose it ourselves? Of course, the believers will be very disappointed and even angry and resentful. But at least we can let some believers know that there's still light and justice in the Temple of Light, and there's still hope for redemption." Hearing this, Owens couldn't help but scratch his hair, using the tingling pain to suppress the chill on his scalp. He looked hesitant. Fight to live from the brink of death? Your idea. It makes sense, but it's also a little bold. Can't you be gentler? No. Sylvia waved her hand firmly. The Temple of Light is now like having a serious illness, and it can't be overcome. It can only be treated with strong medicine. Otherwise, we can only watch it weaken, decay, and finally be completely defeated. Okay, your words have moved me. Roland spread his hands. But in this way, will we still have a chance to treat the Temple of Light? They will hate us to death, and will want to kill us as soon as possible. This was a fact. Sylvia and Owens were both born in the Temple of Light, so they naturally knew how terrifying the power of the Temple of Light was. It was no exaggeration to say that it was as easy to kill them as crushing an ant. That's not necessarily true. Perhaps it was because she had determined the direction of their efforts. Sylvia's expression relaxed a lot, and she said with a chuckle, "Let's not talk about anything else. Let's talk about Tang Yin." He was wanted by the Temple of Light all over the continent, but he's still alive and well. A few days ago, he even dared to make trouble at the Northern Temple, but we still can't do anything to him. Owens wanted to say something, but Sylvia waved her hand and interrupted. Of course, I know we're different from that guy. Well, although I don't want to admit it, he's indeed much better than us in some aspects. At least when it comes to escaping, I've never seen anyone more professional than him. She thought of a suitable adjective and paused. But we also have our own advantages and helpers. We're not fighting alone. Advantages and helpers? Owens raised his eyebrows in surprise, thought for a while, and asked doubtfully, "Is there?" "Of course there is." Sylvia nodded heavily, looking very confident. The Temple of Light is indeed in trouble now, but not all of the clergymen are in trouble. Have you forgotten that there's a group of people in the Temple of Light? Their faith in the Father is extremely pure. Before she finished speaking, Owens's heart suddenly moved, and he could not help but blurt out, "Puritans." Yes, the Puritans. In addition, there are some ascetics. They're the mainstay of the Temple of Light. The so-called Puritans were actually normal clergymen. Their every move was strictly in accordance with the ancient teachings of the temple, advocating a diligent and simple way of life. At the same time, they believed that the current situation of the Temple of Light was gradually changing. So their core idea was to purify the Temple of Light. And it was precisely because of this idea that their position in the Temple of Light was somewhat strange. After all, not all of the clergymen had the same awareness as them, and over time, they simply formed their own faction within the Temple of Light. It could be imagined that such a faction was naturally disliked by most of the clergymen. So under intentional or unintentional suppression, almost no one in this faction could occupy a high position in the Temple of Light. Their presence was really weak. This was why Owens did not think of them just now. As for the ascetics, there was no need to say more. Just looking at the name, it was obvious what kind of group they were. They were only keen on studying the teachings or obsessed with power and did not care about anything else. They were considered one of the few neutral factions within the Temple of Light. And to a certain extent, Sylvia was both a Puritan and an ascetic. So her relationship with the people of these two factions was naturally good. So as she came forward, it was indeed an advantage and a helper. "Well, it seems that you've been thinking a lot these days." "Well, I have to say, I'm convinced by you." After pondering for a while, Owens decisively hammered his palm. "Then let's do it. I'll contact the Puritans. You go and announce the matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Be careful. You may have to bear the crime of being a traitor of the Temple of Light for a long time in the future. In fact, I'm already a traitor, aren't I?" Pointing at the wanted poster, Sylvia's face was full of self-mockery, then touched her wrinkled old face. "Fortunately, I now have this. I should be able to avoid it for a while. Haha, it's quite ironic. I wanted to kill him, but I didn't expect that one day I would have to use his things to save my life." She did not say explicitly, but Owens naturally knew who he was referring to. He shrugged and said, "Then take it as the price he paid for destroying half of the Temple of Light, so that I can use it with peace of mind. Actually, I was the one who threw the demon skull. After a short day, in a town somewhere, Sylvia stood up and confirmed the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. Let's not talk about whether her desperate approach would succeed, at least for now. This statement, made with her reputation, was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The forces of the Temple of Light in the north were completely passive, and there was even a trend of being driven out, and she, the original sacred Grand Paladin of the Temple of Light, became a traitor who was reviled by the public overnight. The ordinary believers still could not understand. The fanatics directly insulted her, and the Temple of Light secretly sent people to kill her. The only person who would benefit from this would be Twain, who was in Coldwater City. After receiving the news, even someone as calm as him could not help but be stunned for a while. Then he could not help but look up and sigh. Sure enough, one fan is worth 10 haters. Chapter 796. As expected, a fan is worth 10 haters. A boss, what fan? What haters? In the morning, on the side of the lively street, David looked at Tang Yin, who was full of emotion and could not help but scratch his head and ask in confusion. Oh, nothing. Tang Yin waved his hand and came back to his senses. He looked at the inconspicuous fruit shop across the street and casually changed the topic. It's almost time. Go and prepare with Harry. Don't mess up the act. Don't worry, boss, it's fine. David patted his chest and replied confidently. Then he turned around and flashed into the alley behind him, disappearing in an instant. Tang Yin looked at the fruit shop across the street again, which was the hidden address of the Coldwater City Bounty Hunter Guild, and grinned. The east is not bright, but the west is bright. You have to give me some good news to comfort my wounded little heart. After saying that, he shook his head, got into the carriage, and left. Tang Yin was not in a good mood now. To be honest, if it were not for the fact that the information about the Eye of Disaster was true, Tang Yin would really suspect that this stubborn thing was a prank made by some bored guy just to tease the world. This was because although he spent a few days fighting to the death with it, he did not expect this Eye of Disaster to be completely unromantic. His painstaking research ended up in vain, and he did not gain anything at all. It was also because of this helplessness that Tang Yin had to temporarily give up on the Eye of Disaster and focus on the assassin organization. With 30 branches of the original Bounty Hunter Guild in hand, in addition to ready-made channels and operational methods, it could be said that the framework of Tang Yin's assassin organization had been roughly established. If they wanted to operate normally, this team would be more than enough. However, the effect Tang Yin wanted was certainly not just this. Putting everything else aside, there were no missions related to the Temple of Light in the guild. This did not meet Tang Yin's basic requirements. Of course, in the Bran Empire, no guild dared to openly post missions related to the Temple of Light. That was completely courting death. However, Tang Yin was different. He and the Divine Hall had long been incompatible like fire and water. It was a life and death struggle. Naturally, he did not mind striking harder. However, it was not easy to do so. Tang Yin was alone. Of course, he could roll up his sleeves and fight against the Divine Hall. But others couldn't do the same. With the Temple of Light's huge influence, there weren't many people who dared to offend them. However, there were no absolutes in the world. If there was a huge profit to be made, then everything would be hard to say. As soon as the carriage left, a small chaos broke out in the dark room behind the fruit shop. Damn it, Fat Cat, don't go too far. I have something important to do now. Otherwise, do you really think I'm afraid of you? Ha ha, silly bear. I remember 2 weeks ago, you said that you would scram the moment you see me. I didn't expect you to have the face to come back. What? Do you want to scram again? F***CK off. I'm warning you, Fat Cat, don't force my hand. Yo, I haven't seen you for a few days, and you've become more arrogant. Come on, I don't mind teaching you a lesson. The Bounty Hunter Guild's layout was similar to that of a pub's hall. There were rows of wooden tables, wine jars, counters, waiters, and so on. If it weren't for the fact that the lights here were too dim, and the customers who were either gathered or alone in one place all had unfriendly expressions and overflowing killing intent, This scene wouldn't have been much different from an ordinary tavern. The source of the noise and chaos came from the center of the hall. One was tall and strong, and the other was short and fat. The two middle-aged men were a few steps away from each other, and the atmosphere was tense. Their hands were pressed on the weapons at their waists, and a fierce fight was inevitable. Of course, this was normal. This was the Bounty Hunter Guild, where the competition was cruel. Those who were present were masters who only recognized money. They did not have the kindness to come out and stop the fight. On the contrary, the bounty hunters who were closer to them took the initiative to pull the tables away to make space. Then, they ordered a glass of good wine and pointed at the two people in the hall with their acquaintances, guessing who would win out of boredom. If there was a difference of opinion, they might as well make a small bet. In short, they were just there to watch the show. A glass of silver ale. These two people look a little unfamiliar. A red-faced old man who had just entered casually found a seat and sat down. As he waved his hand to order a glass of wine, he squinted at the two people in the hall and could not help but ask in confusion. They both came to Hansui City recently. They should have old grudges from before. Oh, it's Eldarin. You were out on a mission this month, so you don't know about this. After seeing the red-faced old man's appearance, the quick-witted young man smiled and pointed. Hey, the fat one is called Ironclaw Tiger. He's the one who is now called Fat Cat. As for the silly bear, I think he's called Violent Bear or something. I can't remember. Sigh, now that you're out in the world, your nicknames are so fancy. It's so hard to remember. Anyway, he's not human. Haha, I see. Well, who do you think will win? I think so. Well, Eldarin, why don't we make a small bet? How about 100 gold coins? You little brat, haha. You're really a gambler. After pondering for a while, the red-faced old man raised his glass. Okay, then let's make a bet. I'll bet on that silly bear. I knew it. Eldarin, you should know that you can't judge a book by its cover. I'll bet on that fat cat. Oh, from your tone. Before he finished speaking, someone shook his head and said, Eldarin, you've been fooled by this brat. Actually, the two of them had already fought here 2 weeks ago. That silly bear who looks strong is actually a level lower than that fat cat. He's bound to lose. Challenging someone of a higher level, or even a higher level, was a pioneering feat that could only be accomplished by warriors with extraordinary talent. For ordinary warriors, the strength of both parties' do-chi would more or less determine the outcome of the battle. This silly bear's strength was 1 level lower than Fat Cat's. Moreover, he had just lost to Fat Cat 2 weeks ago. So now, no matter how one looked at it, he was bound to lose this time. After understanding the details, the red-faced old man helplessly glared at the young man and sighed. I was careless. I knew you were up to no good. You can't say that, Eldarin. Everyone knows that you've completed a big mission this time, and the reward is quite generous. It's just 100 gold coins. You can treat it as a reward for this junior. The red-faced old man was a person who knew when to let go. Nodding slightly, he focused his attention on the arena. Okay, I don't have any objections, but you have to ask this silly bear. If he loses, then you'll have the money to drink. Laughing without saying a word, the young man took it as the red-faced old man had not given up. He did not argue and also looked at the arena. He only needed to wait for the results to come out to collect his bet. The atmosphere in the arena became more and more tense. Although they did not directly fight, the words were getting more and more intense. It should be just as the young man had guessed. These two had some old grudges, and the content of their insults sounded very complicated. But gradually, they began to focus on the new reward of the guild. A few pieces of paper of unknown use. Fat Cat mocked the silly bear for not collecting the guild's reward after completing the mission, and instead collecting these useless pieces of paper. He was really stupid to the extreme. On the other hand, the silly bear mocked Fat Cat for her shallow knowledge, completely picking sesame seeds and throwing away watermelons. The two of them being so slow naturally attracted the dissatisfaction of the bounty hunters who were watching a good show. Only the red-faced old man who had just returned was completely confused when he heard the guild reward paper. Just as he was about to ask the young man beside him, the two people in the arena suddenly began to fight. The silly bear was using a two-handed heavy sword, while the fat cat was using a pair of sharp iron claws. In an instant, a small area of effect burst out fiercely. That's not right. Seeing the red and green fighting lights colliding, the red-faced old man was stunned and turned his head in surprise. They're both middle-level and high-level warriors. They're evenly matched. How could it be that there's a difference of one level? I don't know. The young man was also dumbfounded. He had seen the previous battle with his own eyes, and the silly bear's fighting chi was clearly at the middle level. Could it be that in these short 2 weeks, he had risen another level? What a joke. At his age, he was still a middle-level warrior, so he definitely could not be someone with outstanding talent. If that was the case, how could he have advanced so easily? The young man was not the only one who had this doubt. As the party involved, the fat cat naturally also had this doubt, and because it was caught off guard, its face was filled with fear as it roared crazily. How is this possible? Didn't you just reach the middle level a month ago? Damn it, this is impossible. Step by step, it approached and swung its sword fiercely. Short-sighted rat. I've already told you about that piece of paper. The silly bear snorted coldly, opened its mouth to say something, but immediately closed it vigilantly. But the bounty hunters present were all quick-witted people, and when they heard this, they could not help but be moved. They did not know that the Bounty Hunter Guild had changed owners, but they knew that the guild had recently introduced a new policy, and that was the hunters with a certain level of authority would have 2 choices when completing a big mission. One was to receive the original bounty, and the other was to receive an unknown piece of paper. Regarding the latter, the bounty hunters were naturally curious, but only at the stage of being curious. After all, compared to the rich bounty, an unknown piece of paper was really not attractive. But now looking at the silly bear's hesitant look, the hunters' thoughts began to run wild. They had seen what happened just now, and the silly bear's short-sighted words were undoubtedly saying that the fat cat did not know the special use of the paper. Combined with the fact that the silly bear had just advanced to the middle level a month ago, a guess gradually appeared in the hearts of the hunters. Could it be that this paper could quickly increase one's do-chi strength? Without a doubt, this guess was absurd and also subverted all the martial artists' understanding of do-chi strength. If they heard this from somewhere else, they would only think that it was nonsense and laugh it off. But now, a living example was placed in front of them, and they had no choice but to believe it. Just as the atmosphere in the hall was getting more and more strange, the battle had already been decided. With the same level of strength, one had the intention, while the other was careless. The outcome was already decided. Bang! Following a loud sound, the fat cat was directly sent flying by the Domang heavy sword, smashing through the wooden door of the hall, and flew out in a sorry state. Where do you think you're going? The silly bear seemed to have the intention to kill, and seeing this, he did not give up and rushed out with his sword, instantly disappearing outside the door. Seeing this, everyone was stunned, and the hall was silent. Then swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. More than 10 figures suddenly rushed out in the same direction, quickly rushing towards the door. Obviously, these people had the same thought. If that paper could really increase one's do-chi strength quickly, then the silly bear who drank the soup would undoubtedly understand it the best. So as long as they caught him, everything would be revealed. But unfortunately, before the hunters could react, the first few who rushed out had already returned. Looking at the expectant eyes of the crowd, they all shook their heads and sighed, their faces full of disappointment. Obviously, they were one step slower, and the silly bear and fat cat had already taken advantage of the time when they were stunned to run away. Sigh, what a pity. Eldarin? Haha, don't forget my 100 gold coins. Patting the shoulder of the youth with a sad face, the red-faced elder smiled and stood up. Then, he took a deep breath, as if he had decided on something, and walked behind the counter with determination. Don't forget, he had just returned from a big mission, and, with his hunter level, it was enough for him to receive the mysterious paper. The opportunity was right in front of him. If he did not take it now, when would he? Not long after the red-faced elder received the mysterious paper, in the system's space. Ding. Long-term mission. Establish an assassin organization. Stage reward. Ding. Obtained 100 experience points. Ding. Obtained 100 experience points. As expected, listening to the system's synthesis sound that he had expected, the corners of Tang Un's mouth curled up, and the gloominess brought about by the eye of disaster dissipated. The so-called mysterious paper was naturally the Do-Chi circulation channel that Tang Un had set up for a long time. The reason why no one dared to provoke the Temple of Light was, firstly, because they were indeed powerful, and secondly, because there was really nothing worth taking the risk. But it was different now. People were greedy, and the only difference was that the target of their greed was different. Some wanted fame, some wanted power, and some wanted beauties. And for a warrior, what could be more tempting than increasing one's Do-Chi strength? In a different world, the strong were respected, and this concept might not have much of an impact on ordinary people. But it was different for the warriors in it. No warrior was willing to become an ant in the eyes of the strong and be casually crushed to death. And if they wanted to change this situation, they had to become strong themselves. Only then could they control their own fate and control the fate of others. It was precisely because of this irresistible temptation that when the silly bear and the fat cat, Dave and Harry, worked together to put on this show and put this opportunity on the table, all the hunters present were tempted. And one could imagine that when this acting platform was bigger, there would be more and more warriors who would be tempted. At that time, Tang Un would have a terrifying power in his hands that all the forces would have no choice but to raise their eyebrows. Of course, that was in the future. Tang Un did not think that far ahead. In fact, the reason why he threw out the Do-Chi circulation channel at this time was not because of some terrifying power, but because he was wondering why his long-term mission of establishing an assassin organization had not given him any experience points. Before Tang Un went to the temple, the gray space had already begun to accept the Hunters Guild, and this was the embryonic form of his assassin organization. Therefore, logically speaking, Tang Un should have received the stage reward of this long-term mission at that time. However, this was not the case. After Tang Un returned to Cold Water City a week ago, he only received the experience points from the Light's Dusk mission. After some thought, Tang Un believed that the problem was with him. In other words, the system did not admit that he was truly in control of these newly established assassin organizations. This was indeed the case. Although Tang Un had 30 organization bases in name, he had only borrowed the outer shell and had not had the time to make any substantial changes. He still lacked a catalyst that could allow him to completely control the branch organizations. Therefore, Tang Un released the Do-Chi circulation channel. Therefore, a large amount of experience points swarmed in. This was what Tang Un had been talking about previously. The East is not bright, the West is bright. It was a pity that he could not deal with the eye of disaster for the time being. However, the experience points from this long-term mission were equally important. To Tang Un, this was even more important than the eye of disaster because it bound Tang Un's hands and feet to a certain extent. Otherwise, how could Tang Un have given the demon skull to Sylvia in the Northern Temple? Tang Un happily watched his experience points jump all the way to 8,500. He was only 1,500 away from leveling up to 10,000. His mood immediately became much better. When he exited the system, Tang Un was still wondering if he should promote the Do-Chi channel and pull more warriors into the water. He might as well level up the system first. Mr. Arthur, you're here? Mr. Arthur? Arthur? Oh. As soon as he looked up and saw Lena standing at the entrance of the alchemy laboratory with her robe fluttering in the wind, Tang Un immediately returned to his senses. He quickly pulled the reins to stop the carriage and spread his hands apologetically. Sorry, I was thinking about something just now and got distracted. The reason why Tang Un came out today, in addition to releasing the Do-Chi channel, was that Lena had asked someone to send a message saying that the dagger he had asked for before had been successfully forged. Chapter 655 mentioned it. He, the nickname of the raccoon hole-filling demon, is not for nothing. What? It had to be said that although the hole-filled dagger made of pure black meteorite had accompanied Tang In for a long time and had made many miraculous contributions, it was indeed time to change it. Originally, Tang In wanted to make some slight improvements to the dagger, but after Lena found out about the material of the dagger, she dug another hole in the dagger and took away some black meteorite essence. Then, she said that she would help him make a new one. Tang In was naturally happy about this proposal. Not to mention, the domineering side that Lena helped little Caro make was enough to make Tang In look forward to this dagger that he had never seen before. In fact, the surprise that Lena brought to Tang In was far more than just a dagger. Chapter 797. It was a single-edged dagger, completely black and about a foot long. Generally speaking, its design was reserved, and it looked ordinary. But if one paid attention and tasted it carefully, the irregular S-curve of the blade was bewitching and strange, and the arc was wonderful. Most importantly, the slightly upturned tip of the blade cut the arc cleanly, making the sharp edge stand out, bloodthirsty and intimidating. In the courtyard, the dagger was spread out in a white palm. I made this dagger casually. I don't know if you like it, Arthur. Well, you said to keep a low profile, so this dagger is completely black. There are no magic ingredients added, so it won't attract attention and won't be detected by others. As for the materials, it's more complicated. The main body is black ice mystic iron, mixed with black jade, cold star, or black gold stone. Oh, right, there's also a bit of black meteorite essence. After a pause, she explained, black meteorite essence can cut gold and jade and cut iron like mud. It's indeed the best material to make weapons. But the effect of using a bit of this material is the same as using a lot. You only need to make the part of the weapon, because although it's good at attacking, it's still lacking in toughness. So your previous dagger made purely of black meteorite essence. Well, it's a bit too gorgeous. He touched his nose. It doesn't matter. You can just say it's a waist or a nouveau riche style. I don't mind. He was slightly startled. Uh-huh. Lena covered her mouth and chuckled, then reached out and handed the dagger over. I'm only an alchemist after all, not a warrior, so this dagger may have some flaws. I invited you here today to let you try it. If you feel that there are any flaws, I'll make some changes. He waved his hand and interrupted. Lena, you're thinking too much. Don't talk about flaws. I think this dagger is perfect. After Lena finished her general introduction, Tang In rubbed his hands and couldn't wait to take the dagger. In an instant, a cool and comfortable feeling went through the handle to the bottom of his heart. Stunned, Tang In slightly raised his eyebrows. His expression couldn't help but become serious. Then his fingers moved slightly, and the dagger nimbly spun between his fingers. Forehand, backhand, strike, stab, flick, swipe. It silently pierced through the air without a trace of wind. Only traces of cold light could be seen. When Lena introduced the dagger, she didn't mention how sharp and special it was. Of course, this didn't mean that she didn't have confidence or wanted to hide it. She just didn't want to take credit for it. However, Tang In was very familiar with the dagger. He only needed to try it out a little. He didn't need to use it in actual combat. He already knew it in his heart. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this dagger had far exceeded his expectations. Its entire body was dark and low profile. It was perfect for an assassin style of assassination. It was made of pure metal and did not require any magic materials. This also eliminated the possibility of detection. Perfect. It cut through the air noiselessly and emitted a cold light. This represented the extreme sharpness of the dagger. Perfect. For such a dagger that could only be described as perfect, how could Tang In be dissatisfied? More importantly, when Tang In picked up this dagger for the first time, there was an indescribable sense of comfort and pleasure in his heart. Weight, thickness, design of the hilt. Any more was inappropriate, and any less was inappropriate. It was just a clever balance in the middle. It was the perfect weapon tailor-made for Tang In. Phew! Gently exhaling, Tang In put away the dagger and bowed solemnly to Lena. Thank you for your trouble. Good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. These were not polite words. They came from Tang In's heart. Lena was indeed a master alchemist. Making a dagger for her was a complete waste of talent. It was easy, but if she said that this dagger was casually made like she said, Tang would never believe it. If it was just to make a good weapon, he believed that many people could do it. But if it was to make a good weapon that was suitable for the user, it was extremely difficult, because this required the maker not only to pay attention to the weapon itself, but also to consider the user situation. The latter was also the most difficult. There were too many subjective and objective factors. For example, the size of the palm, the length of the 5 fingers, the fighting style, the habit of making a move. After all these factors were taken into account, the complexity of the entire process would definitely reach an appalling level. So, how could it be casually made? He hurriedly waved his hand. No, it's just casually made. As long as you like it, you're welcome. Perhaps she did not expect Tang and to express his gratitude so solemnly. Lena's pretty face instantly turned red, and she was abnormally embarrassed. It's what I should do. Binoculars, purple boar cannon, little Carol's sickle, my dagger. Sigh. I really don't know how to thank you. There's really no need. We're old friends. Have you thought about giving this dagger a name? Lena finally found a reason to change the topic, and she could not help but bite her lips. Mr. Arthur, do you know that the more grateful you are, the more distant you and I will be? Lena, oh Lena, you think too much. It's natural to be distant. After all, we are just friends. Tang did not doubt her and touched his nose. How about calling it Tang dagger? Hee. In fact, Tang did not care about naming his own weapon because he always felt that it was a bit pretentious. After clearing her mind of random thoughts, Lena, who had returned to normal, smiled slightly and said seriously, "Then it's better to call it Arthur's dagger." You're the maker. You have the final say. Arthur's dagger, then it's decided. Naming weapons after people was still very common in the other world. However, in order to be recognized and passed down by the public, the user of this weapon generally had to be a legendary figure recognized by history. Of course, this Arthur's dagger was just a casual joke between Tang and Lena. But who knew that it was this unintentional joke that became the beginning of this legendary weapon? After chatting for a while, Tang originally wanted to say goodbye, but at this moment, his heart suddenly moved. By the way, Lena, do you know about the Eye of Disaster? Eye of Disaster? After being stunned, Lena swept away the random thoughts in her mind and frowned. I seem to have heard of it somewhere, but I don't know much about it. Oh, Tang sighed softly when he heard this, and he looked a little regretful. Tang really couldn't do anything about the Eye of Disaster. Just now, he thought that Lena was a master alchemist, so she might know something about it. So he asked this question. But on the other hand, the Eye of Disaster had been hidden by the temple for hundreds of years and had never appeared at all. It was completely normal that Lena didn't know about it. Seeing Tang's regretful look, Lena couldn't help but continue. I remember that this Eye of Disaster doesn't seem to be anything good. Why are you asking this? It's nothing. Well, this thing is now in my hands. After pondering for a while, Tang roughly introduced the Eye of Disaster and expressed his confusion. In the end, he shook his head and said, "Sigh, I can see it, but I can't use it. I'm completely helpless now because of this thing. Do you still have the Eye of Disaster with you? Why don't I try it? It just so happens that I'm quite interested in these strange things now." With her hands spread out, Lena said casually, "It's still with me, but I really don't feel at ease with this thing anywhere else. Do you want to try it?" Tang raised his eyebrows. In terms of researching things, Lena was indeed much more professional than him. But just as he was about to take out the Eye of Disaster from his arm paused. After thinking about it, he shook his head and said, "No, this thing is a bit strange. Ordinary people have almost no resistance in front of it." This was the truth. The Eye of Disaster was notorious. Even when Tang was researching it before, he consciously chose to avoid the deep pupil to avoid being attacked by various negative emotions. If that was the case, then there was no need to mention ordinary people like Lena. Seeing that she could not help Tang Lena looked a little downcast. She could only comfort him by saying, "Don't worry, there will always be a solution." "Well, why don't I tell you about it? I'm researching the feelings of something I've never come into contact with before." After a pause, seeing Tang and nod happily, Lena bit her finger and said, "You asked Alan to give me a design drawing before. I've never seen the things on it before. They're strange, and I don't know how to make them. But I'm still full of confidence, and I've stocked up on all the alchemy materials I think will be useful. Because although I don't know those things, I know that they must be composed of alchemy materials. So I firmly believe that the secret of success is in these alchemy materials. And the reason why I didn't succeed is because I didn't find the right materials. So every time I put all my mind into these materials, I study all aspects of each material thoroughly. Haha, because of this, the alchemists who communicated with me in the past all said that I have a solid foundation and outstanding talent in alchemy, but in fact, I just insisted on using stupid methods." Hearing this, Tangen couldn't help but nod gently. This is the so-called simplification, or looking at the essence through the surface. But the eye of disaster is an elliptical sphere. How can I simplify it? Do I have to smash it? Oh, I'm off topic, sorry. Well, for example, have you heard of the explosive rock ore? This is a necessary material for making explosive crystals. The alchemy books introduce this ore. Generally, it is said that this ore is rich in thunder and fire elements, and its structure is extremely unstable. It will explode at the slightest touch. But I've always had a doubt about this thing. It clearly contains two elements with a fiery nature and is extremely unstable. But how can they coexist peacefully in a piece of ore? After a pause, she continued, "Later, after I dissected and studied it, I accidentally found that in the place where the thunder and fire elements clashed the most fiercely, there was a little hidden light that was difficult to detect. That was actually the blue light chalcedony with extremely gentle characteristics. It played the role of a good guy, sticking the thunder and fire elements together to pacify them." Huh, you didn't expect it, right? It was obviously in the most dangerous place, but there was an opportunity hidden that was difficult to detect. It's really unexpected, yet reasonable. She smiled and shook her head. She tucked the hair on her forehead that was blown by the breeze behind her ear, inadvertently flirtatious. When it came to her field of expertise, Lena had a different kind of charm at this moment. "Wait." Lena's raised arm paused. She looked at Tang, Un's infatuated gaze, and couldn't help but be startled. Then, her face turned slightly red, and she was a little shy. But obviously, Tang didn't pay attention to this. He took a step forward and looked excited. "What did you just say? Repeat again." What did I say? It's unexpected, yet reasonable." "No, the first sentence. The first sentence." "Oh." It was obviously in the most dangerous place. Before she finished speaking, Tang quickly continued, "But there was an opportunity hidden that was difficult to detect. The most dangerous place. Opportunity. Simplifying." He muttered in a low voice, constantly hammering his palms and pacing back and forth. His expression changed unpredictably, as if he was neurotic. Lena was stunned at first, but then she held her breath and remained motionless. She couldn't be more familiar with this state because she had experienced it several times before. It was always when inspiration suddenly appeared and disappeared, suddenly stopping. Tang raised his head and laughed with a deranged expression. "Ha! I understand. It should be like this. It must be like this." Tang had always had a misunderstanding about how to control the eye of disaster. He always tried to crack it from the outside, and he often subconsciously avoided the mysterious pupil. Of course, this was normal. After all, everyone knew that they couldn't look into the pupil of the eye of disaster, otherwise they would be attacked by all kinds of negative emotions. And it was this well-known knowledge that made all those who had obtained the eye of disaster intentionally or unintentionally avoid it. But Tang suddenly became enlightened after hearing Lena's understanding of alchemy. The most evil part of the eye of disaster was undoubtedly that mysterious pupil. It was the most dangerous part, but at the same time, it should also be where the opportunity was hidden. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. Although it hadn't been proven in practice, Tang had a faint premonition that he should have found the keyhole to unlock the mystery of the Eye of Disaster. With his emotions surging, Tang took another step forward and hugged Lena in a daze. He planted a light kiss on her smooth forehead. "Haha, thank you. You're really my lucky star. Thank you." He expressed his gratitude without thinking and then rushed to the building behind the alchemy laboratory. Lena blankly blinked and stood in place, as if she had been struck by lightning. Her delicate body tensed up, and she was speechless for a while. "Oh, right? Is there an empty room here?" Tang's voice echoed in the distance. She subconsciously pointed in a direction. "Thank you." Her voice once again echoed in the distance, but Tang's silhouette had already disappeared. In a small courtyard, the light was languid and the noise was far away. The green leaves and red flowers in the potted plant in the corner gently floated in the air. After a while, Lena's tense body gradually relaxed. She raised her hand and touched her forehead, feeling some warmth that hadn't completely disappeared. The corners of her mouth couldn't help rising as she quietly smiled. Not far away, Tang rushed into the empty room and quickly circled around, closing all the doors and windows. He instantly flashed back to the table and pressed his chest, calming his excitement. He then took out the Eye of Disaster from his bosom. He looked at it and solemnly placed it in the middle of the table. Then he walked back and forth a few steps. Even though Tang had braved through a storm of blood alone, he wasn't sure about the unknown situation he would face next. However, Tang had never lacked courage. After taking a deep breath, he walked back to the table and sat down. He leaned forward slightly and looked into the deep pupils of the Eye of Disaster. He paused for more than a second. The feeling was exactly the same as when he first saw it in the shrine. Loneliness, anger, mania, all kinds of negative emotions were like weeds in the wilderness, constantly growing in Tang's heart and then growing wildly. However, Tang, who was already prepared, naturally wouldn't be troubled by this. His arms spread out on both sides of the table, gradually closed in front of him. His knuckles were crossed, and only his 2 index fingers were gently touching according to a certain regular frequency. Tap, tap, tap. His chest gradually rose and fell. All kinds of negative emotions were like boulders that constantly smashed into the lake of his heart, causing great waves. However, Tang's expression didn't change at all. He was expressionless, and the frequency of his fingers touching was still regular. His emotions were surging, but his expression was still. 2 extremely contradictory temperaments alternated on Tang's body, rising and falling one after another, giving people an extremely strange feeling. This was a confrontation of the mind. Although it was silent, it was as if he was walking on thin ice. If negative emotions suppressed his rationality, then Tang would fall into the abyss of eternal damnation and become another lunatic victim of the Eye of Disaster who had lost his mind. However, is that all? Tang suddenly sighed with a hint of disappointment. If it was the Tang who had just arrived in the other world, or the Tang from last year, he might have been defeated by this tidal wave of emotions. However, the current Tang had killed tens of thousands of people with a single strike of his dagger. He had fought hundreds of battles alone. His will was so firm that how could he be shaken by mere negative emotions? As if sensing Twain's provocation, the Eye of Disaster's pupils became even deeper and more bottomless, chilling to the bone. Suddenly, the light in the room dimmed. All the doors and windows were clearly closed, but there seemed to be countless cold winds appearing out of thin air around him, surging secretly. Immediately afterward, a shadow gradually condensed in front of Tang. It was dressed in a long robe, and its expression was distorted. There were countless black gases surrounding it. Frowning, Tang thought for a while before matching the slightly familiar figure in front of him with a name in his heart. New York, the godfather of the church in Little Rock Village, and the first person from the other world to die in the hands of Tang. How? With a long and shrill howl, the cold wind blew. New York had already arrived in front of Tang in an instant. His 10 fingers were pitch black as he grabbed at Tang En's neck. The corners of Tang En's mouth twitched slightly. He did not move. With a flip of his right hand, the pockmarked dagger bypassed New York's arm at a speed that seemed slow but was actually fast and went straight between his eyebrows. Bang! New York's face flashed with extreme pain. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to let out an unwilling roar, but his body had already exploded like mist and dissipated into thin air. However, this was just the beginning. On the side, countless figures kept flashing. Some of them were familiar, such as Borg, Sessman, Eunice, Yemal, and so on. There were also those who did not know but felt familiar, and they all appeared. However, regardless of whether they were familiar or unfamiliar, they all had one thing in common, and that was that they had all died under Tang En's dagger. This scene was like a group of creditors who came to collect their debts during the new year. Not a single one of them was left behind. It was spectacular. Chapter 798. The room was completely immersed in thick black gas, and the original decorations and debris were gone. There were only countless floating phantoms with ferocious expressions, which made one's hair stand on end. However, seeing a number of familiar victims appearing together, including Yemal and other terrifying powerhouses, Tang En did not panic. Instead, the corners of his mouth were slightly sunken, and his face was full of sarcasm. Playing this game is just SOSO. With a glance, his eyes were red. When I was alive, I could kill all of you with my sword. After death, I can still kill all of you again. Come on. Suddenly, he roared and straightened his shoulders. A monstrous killing intent burst out like a landslide and a tsunami. It was as if a strong wind had passed through, causing the surrounding phantoms to take a step back. Howl! As if enraged, the surrounding phantoms raised their heads and howled. Their expressions were extremely distorted, and the cold wind was miserable. It was like a purgatory of vengeful souls. Then, under the leadership of Yemal, who had a big hole in his heart, the black gas surged and swarmed over. Get lost! Tang En sat motionless, and his expression was slightly crazy. He raised his shoulders, and the pot-holed dagger in his right hand and the pitch-black dagger that he had just obtained in his left hand waved his arms at the same time. In an instant, he set up a saber net around him, and it directly covered his entire body. With a shrill scream, Yemal, who was the first to rush over, crashed into the saber net. The black gas around him was instantly weakened by more than half. If he had not retreated in time, he would have followed in York's footsteps. As expected, Tang En breathed a sigh of relief when he saw this. A huge weight was lifted from his heart, and then his killing intent intensified. He raged and roared, instantly turning the surrounding space into a cold ice cellar. Tang En had previously guessed that although Yemal, Eunice, and the others in front of him were no different from real people, they were only phantoms created by the Eye of Disaster after all. It was impossible for them to have the terrifying strength of real people. Otherwise, with such a luxurious lineup gathered together, even if it was just accumulating power, this room would probably be shattered into pieces in an instant. The facts proved that Tang En's guess was right. Although Yemal and the others did have a certain amount of attack power, their strength was only at the level of an intermediate martial artist. Although relying on their numbers could still bring about quite a bit of trouble, if it were anyone else, they would have already fallen into the trap. But for Tang En, this was just a mere inconvenience. His current strength was no longer comparable to the past. The two daggers sealed off the surroundings, and his killing intent was like an iron chain that crossed the river. No matter how great the waves were, he would not move. What do you do to me? Of course, Tang En wouldn't underestimate the Eye of Disaster because of this. In fact, the Eye of Disaster's main attack was not the weakened Yemal and the others on the surface, but the mental attack. After all, the Eye of Disaster was good at stirring up and exaggerating the emotions in people's hearts. The negative emotions from before could be seen as external means of attack. As long as they were forcefully instilled and occupied the target's heart lake, the goal of control would be achieved. However, this method did not work well on Tang-an. The negative emotions entered very smoothly, but Tang-an's perseverance had always been in the dominant position, and it did not waver at all. Since the plan failed, the Eye of Disaster quickly changed its strategy. It searched Tang-an's memories and made Yema and the others attack. And this was also an internal attack. This was because as long as Tang-in counterattacked, his heart lake would inevitably fluctuate. Whether it was a high fighting spirit, a little fear, or thinking about battle strategies, as long as he was distracted, his heart lake would naturally not be as calm as before. Then, the Eye of Disaster's opportunity would come. Unfortunately, although Tang-in fell into the trap, he did not fall into it. Although his heart lake was no longer calm, it was replaced by a crazy, killing intent. Kill, 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 kill. In just a short moment, the phantoms that came one after another collapsed and disappeared under the blood-colored blade light as if they were vegetables. There were almost no threat. Gradually, the Eye of Disaster seemed to be a little discouraged, and the phantoms that kept appearing out of thin air gradually decreased. It cannot be helped. There was only killing intent in Tang-un's heart, and all other negative emotions were firmly suppressed. Even if it was provoked, it would not be able to do anything. If the Eye of Disaster exaggerated the killing intent, it would be equivalent to helping Tang increase his fighting spirit. Both sides were helpless, and it was best to stop. As the last unwilling howl disappeared, all the phantoms and black gas disappeared. The scene in the room appeared again, and everything returned to normal. He put away the dagger. Huff! Huff! Large beads of sweat kept dripping down from his temples. Tang-in's chest heaved up and down like a broken bellows as he gasped for breath. The Eye of Disaster could not do anything to him, and Tang-in was the same. What was worse was that he could only passively respond, and the pressure was not small. He turned his head and looked around. The light outside the window was still bright and beautiful. When he retracted his gaze, the Eye of Disaster was still sitting quietly on the table, without any changes. Is it over? Tang-in raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at the Eye of Disaster's pupils again. He paused, and the uncomfortable feeling from before completely disappeared. It seemed that the Eye of Disaster was convinced. Did I succeed? What about the control method? At least give me a hint. Just as Tang-in was puzzled, there was a soft knock on the main door. Arthur? Arthur, are you okay? It was Lena, and her voice was a little anxious. Oh, don't worry, I'm fine. Tang-in subconsciously turned his head and said. Then, with a creak, light leaked in, and the door that was not closed was pushed open. Lena raised her hand outside the door, and she looked a little stunned. After a pause, she stepped in. I heard your roar outside and was a little worried, so, before she finished speaking, Tang-un's expression changed, and he shouted anxiously, Don't come in. Although the shadows had disappeared, there might still be some invisible things around. He naturally did not care, but it was hard to say for ordinary people like Lena. I can't take a look, huh? Lena looked at Tang-un's anxious expression and subconsciously wanted to retreat. However, at this moment, her delicate body suddenly shook, and her eyes instantly became empty and lifeless. She slowly lowered her head. Damn it! Seeing that what he was worried about still happened, Tang-in suddenly got up and instantly flashed to Lena's side. He was about to reach out, but he hesitated. Tang-in did not know the consequences of being controlled by the Eye of Disaster, so he did not dare to act rashly. At this moment, Lena slowly raised her head as if she was awakened from her sleep. Her eyes were blank, and she tilted her head to look at Tang-in beside her. Her cheeks suddenly blushed, and she pursed her lips hesitantly. Mr. Arthur? Actually, Lena, I'm Tang-in. After calling a few times, seeing that Lena was indifferent, Tang-in could not help but frown. He reached out to take her away from here first. However, his outstretched arm was suddenly grabbed tightly. Lena's eyes drooped slightly, and she instinctively felt a little shy. Actually, I love you. What? Even someone as calm as Tang and felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he heard that. He was immediately dumbfounded. Don't worry, I didn't say it because I want anything. I know you like Miss Josiah, and I shouldn't have said that. But, I'm sorry, I really can't control myself. She bit her lips, and there seemed to be tears in her words. Her fingers kept pinching the corner of her robe, loosening and tightening at times, indicating her master's unusually nervous mood. Licking his lips, Tangen's expression was a little stiff, and he forced himself to say, don't talk nonsense. You're only being controlled by the eye of disaster now. Suddenly waving her hand to interrupt, Lena looked a little agitated. It's not because of the eye of disaster. Even if it is, I should thank it because it allowed me to say what I've always wanted to say. So, Mr. Arthur, please let me finish. She looked up and blinked, inhaling slightly. I know I'm just a nightingale. No matter what I do now, no matter how hard I work, no matter how my identity changes, it can't change the fact that I used to be a nightingale, and it should always be so in the future. Perhaps I'm not qualified to talk about love at all, and no one will believe in love from a nightingale. But, looking straight ahead, she clenched her fists, and tears slid down her empty eyes. Mr. Arthur, I love you. I've always loved you. I don't ask for the same love from you, but please believe in my love for you, because it's the only pure thing in my dirty body. Her voice was faint, and it finally blended into the mottled light, becoming one with the light. Tang listened quietly, his eyes dazed, and he was momentarily speechless. Chapter 799. Silence, continued silence. Standing there blankly, Tang seemed to be stunned by this shocking news, and he couldn't recover for a while. After a moment, Lena took the lead to look away. Her expression was gloomy, and her eyelids drooped slightly. A few crystal tears fell quietly. I'm sorry, Mr. Arthur. I was too greedy. You're right not to believe me. After all, I'm just a nightingale, not clean. Who said that? Tang took a deep breath, as if he had decided on something. He spread out his hands, and the corners of his mouth rose. I believe you. After a short scream, Lena took a step back and covered her mouth with both hands. Her face was full of disbelief and surprise. Rolling tears slid down her beautiful face like a pear blossom in the rain, making people feel pity and love. Then, she quickly stepped forward and jumped into Tangen's arms. Her two jade-like arms were tightly entwined, and she sobbed, Thank you, boo-hoo, thank you. Don't worry, I really won't ask for anything, and I won't fight with Miss Josiah. As long as you understand my feelings, that's enough. Gently shaking his head. This is unfair to you, and, slowly stroking her soft hair and pushing it aside, Tangen's palm was very gently placed on the back of her neck. I haven't told you. Actually, I also like you. And acting skills. Huh. With a chuckle, the crisp sound of her throat breaking could be heard. Tang suddenly stepped back, and Lena's delicate body trembled violently. Her whole head was bent irregularly, which looked extremely terrifying. In an instant, the faint, warm atmosphere was swept away. What was even stranger was that Lena's originally beautiful face was instantly enveloped by a layer of viscous black gas, making her look ferocious and terrifying. Her eyes were no longer empty, but full of resentment and ruthlessness. How? With a long and mournful cry, Lena actually didn't die after suffering such a fatal attack. Tilting her head, she roared unwillingly, I almost succeeded. Impossible. How did you find out? Needless to say, this Lena was another attack created by the Eye of Calamity. Tang pursed his lips, and with a flip of his hand, he flashed his dagger and stepped forward. I have no comment. Right after he finished speaking, the blood-red blade flashed and disappeared in a flash, sinking straight into the space between Lena's eyebrows. Bang! Finally, after suffering another lethal blow, Lena suddenly shattered into strands of black chi and instantly vanished into thin air. Then, a faint ripple spread out from the eye of disaster. The scene in the room remained mostly unchanged, but Tang found that he was still sitting in front of the table, as if he had never moved. He turned around and saw that the wooden door that Lena pushed open earlier was now tightly shut. Raising his hand to wipe off the cold sweat on his forehead, Tang could confirm that the scene in front of him was not caused by Space Force. It was a bit like an illusion, but not completely. To describe in more detail, he seemed to have walked into his own mind this time. This eye of disaster was a good trick. It stole information about Lena from his memory, processed it on its own, and then silently set up the previous trap. In fact, with Tang's eyesight, he didn't find any flaws just now, but he felt that something was wrong. Fortunately, Tang had the system space, which was an existence that the eye of disaster couldn't imagine. After realizing that something was wrong, Tang quickly entered the system space and pulled out the true sight, just in case, and exposed the eye of disaster's scheme. To be honest, Tang was really lucky to be able to escape danger this time. It was not an exaggeration to say that if it were someone else just now, even if they realized that something was wrong, they would have fallen for it. And if Lena succeeded, the result would be to be trapped in his own mind forever, and his external body would be controlled by the eye of disaster. Damn, it's lucky that I met you this time. Recalling what had happened just now, even someone as calm as Tang could not help but feel scared. At the same time, Tang finally understood why several masters who had obtained the eye of disaster had gone crazy one after another. Obviously, they had also guessed the key to controlling the eye of disaster, but unfortunately, they were not as lucky as him and could only be trapped in their minds forever. With a sigh, Tang composed himself and looked at the mysterious pupil again. Suddenly, the eye of disaster on the table vibrated slightly, and a glimmer of light emitted from the pupil. It was like a bridge, and before he could react, it instantly entered Tang's eyes. His body trembled slightly, and Tang only felt his eyes suddenly brighten. Then, some images suddenly appeared in his mind, jumping quickly like a movie. Most of the images were dark and quickly flashed by. When the light appeared, it was a person dressed as a miner holding the eye of disaster, looking left and right with a face full of surprise. Then, there was a large scene of slaughter and blood flowed like a river. Then, one by one, the people who had snatched the eye of disaster were first ecstatic, then they kept going crazy, until a burly young man in the northern wilderness held the eye of disaster and said something to more than 10 expressionless barbarians in front of him. It sounded complicated, but the actual time taken for this process was actually only about 3 seconds. Then, the glimmer disappeared, and the eye of disaster returned to its original silence. Phew, I see. After taking a long breath, Tang nodded thoughtfully. If he guessed correctly, the images just now should be the experience of the eye of disaster from its birth until now. The eye of disaster's choice to open these images undoubtedly showed that Tang had indeed become its new owner. Of course, the eye of disaster could not speak. It only showed the images of its experience. As for the specific control method, Tang could only figure it out by himself. Fortunately, he had someone to learn from, and that was his predecessor, the unlucky young man in the northern wilderness. Thinking about the scene just now, Tang raised his eyebrows and walked out of the room with the eye of disaster. He looked around and summoned a guard, who was a member of the secret organization sent to protect this place. "Good morning, Sir Tang." Tang nodded absent-mindedly and greeted, "Yes, hello. Well, go and find me 2 chickens. 2 chickens? The young guard was obviously stunned when he heard this. His expression was a bit strange, and he said hesitantly, "Sir, at this time, and still here, wouldn't the effect be a bit bad?" "Effect? What's not good?" "Huh." Tangen's mouth couldn't help but twitch. "Kid, what are you thinking? I want the kind with 2 legs. No, it's edible." "Ah, okay, you win. How about you find me 2 geese?" After a while, in the backyard of the alchemy laboratory, 2 domestic geese, one gray and one white, had just regained their freedom. As if they were afraid of facing the fate of being slaughtered, they ran around the backyard wall, as if they were in a race. They roared in exasperation. F***CK. Stop, stop. For the first experiment, Tang was not clear about the range of the Eye of Disaster. He wanted to face the two domestic geese head-on, but the other party did not cooperate and kept running. Huh, I'll kill you if you keep running. As soon as he finished speaking, the two domestic geese ran even faster. Fortunately, Tang's speed was not in vain. After a while, he finally forced the two domestic geese into a corner. He rubbed his hands, took out the Eye of Disaster, faced the curled-up domestic geese, focused, and muttered to himself, "Money, beautiful women. F***CK. Tang slapped his forehead and looked at the two domestic geese that did not respond. He also felt that his brain had gone haywire. What was the use of talking to domestic geese about this? After thinking for a while, he said again, "Fear." As soon as he finished speaking, Tang felt a heat in his palm. Then, the two domestic geese seemed to have seen a jackal. Their feathers instantly puffed up, and they quickly flapped their wings and soared into the air. Bang, bang. Two muffled sounds could be heard. Their severely degenerated wings could no longer support their fat bodies. As soon as they flew to the height of a person, they hit the high wall and fell down. Even so, they still struggled to get up and quickly left Tang on surroundings. Success. Tang raised his eyebrows when he saw this. He looked thoughtful. Money, beautiful women, and so on could not tempt domestic geese because these had nothing to do with them. However, for direct emotions like fear, as long as one had the ability to think regardless of their IQ, it would have some effect. The so-called difference might be the difference in the object of fear provoked by the Eye of Disaster. Ordinary people would think of the thing they were most afraid of, such as the legendary evil dragon or the tigress beside them. On the other hand, domestic geese would think of the scene of being slaughtered, or something like jackals, wolves, and dogs. After making some guesses, Tang quickly put away his thoughts and continued walking to the domestic geese. There were too few experiments. It was undoubtedly impossible to have a conclusive opinion now. So now, he could only continue to work hard on these two poor domestic geese. Well, they have worked hard and contributed greatly. I have to reward them. TSK. Should I braise them or steam them? Chapter 800. Braise or steam? That was a problem. However, if the domestic geese could speak, they would probably be crying bitterly right now, expressing in despair that braising and steaming were not a problem, as long as they died fear, anger, joy, sadness, jealousy. Tang tried every emotion he could think of. Under this series of experiments, the two domestic geese were naturally unlucky. If not for their low IQ, they would have collapsed long ago. After a while, the two domestic geese no longer had the excess energy from running all over the place. They curled up in the corner like ostriches, trembling. Twain, on the other hand, spun the Eye of Disaster in his hand with a thoughtful expression. The results of the experiment were not bad, but they were not very good either. First of all, Tang finally familiarized himself with the control method of the Eye of Disaster. In fact, it was simple to say. After the faint light from before, Tang had already felt a faint connection with the Eye of Disaster. It was like a silk thread. When he gave instructions with rapt attention, the Eye of Disaster would follow his instructions. Secondly, the maximum coverage range of the Eye of Disaster was about 3 feet, and it could also be used to cast spells at a fixed point. Tang did not need to hold the Eye of Disaster and cast the spell directly. As long as the target was within this range, it would be fine. It was just not clear if the coverage range was limited or if there was a way to expand it. As for the actual effect, it was hard to say. This was because if emotions were broadly categorized, they could be divided into innate, instinctive emotions and learned complex emotions. After all, the domestic geese's IQ was still a little low. When faced with instinctive emotions such as fear and anger, their reactions could still be clearly seen. However, complex emotions such as jealousy were not much of a reaction. They probably could not fully understand it. Of course, this was not a problem. After all, Tang's future targets would definitely be humans, not poultry. However, Through this, it could be seen that the eye of disaster was not omnipotent. The emotions it could provoke had to be within a certain range first. Beyond this range, it would be useless. Secondly, this emotion had to have a certain foundation. This way, there would be a lot more room for manipulation. Otherwise, creating something out of nothing would be too difficult, and it would be easy to fail. These were the preliminary results of Tang Un's experiment through these two poor domestic geese. Of course, Tang Un couldn't be sure that these judgments were correct, but at least he had a clearer understanding of the eye of disaster, and he was satisfied with this result. Oh, apart from these vague understandings, Tang Un also confirmed one thing. The name Eye of Disaster was indeed worthy of its name. Apart from negative emotions, the positive emotions, such as joy and happiness that he had tried previously, had no effect at all. It was confusing, forget it. Negative emotions it is. I don't expect it to be a good tool for picking up girls anyway. Shrugging, Tang Un stroked the eye of disaster in his palm and looked at the two domestic geese again, revealing a malicious smile. Okay, one last try. Desire. It had to be said that most of the negative emotions were caused by desire, whether it was life or death. Therefore, in Tang Un's opinion, desire could be seen as the eye of disaster's ultimate weapon. Therefore, he deliberately left it for last to experiment. Guagua, desire belonged to the category of instinct. After the two domestic geese were infected, they quickly reacted. The white goose stretched its neck and looked around as if it was looking for something to eat. The other gray goose was more strange. First, it bent its neck and sang loudly. Then it flapped its wings fiercely, constantly trying to jump on the white goose's back. However, the white goose was obviously very dissatisfied with this act of disturbing its foraging. It first avoided it, then flapped its wings and turned around to peck. For a time, these two domestic geese actually fought fiercely under Tang Un's nose. Is this estrus? Realizing this, Tang Un touched his nose and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he was about to cancel the command, a pleasant voice came from behind. "How is it, Arthur? Did you succeed?" It was Lena. She stepped into the backyard with a smile on her face. However, when she saw the two domestic geese fighting fiercely, she couldn't help but be taken aback. It's so lively?" "Ahem. Well, yeah, it's okay." When he turned around and saw that it was Lena, Tang Un subconsciously remembered the scene in the room before, and he suddenly looked a little embarrassed. Now that he thought about it, although the eye of disaster pretended to be Lena and looked exactly the same as the real person, there were still flaws to be found. That was just a shadow created by the eye of disaster when it searched Tang Un's memories. In other words, it was impossible for it to know everything about Lena. After all, there were some things that Tang Un himself didn't know, so naturally, it couldn't be replicated. Therefore, if Tang Un asked for some details at the time and relied on his own speculation, he should be able to find the flaws. In that case, it would naturally avoid Lena's heartfelt confession later, and it wouldn't be as awkward as it was now. I was still careless. Secretly reflecting on himself, Tang Un quickly put away his awkward expression on the surface and waved his hand. Just as he was about to say hello, he suddenly noticed that Lena's footsteps paused, and her eyes were quickly covered with a layer of mist. She looked unusually empty. Looking at this scene that seemed familiar, Tang Un couldn't help but be stunned. When he reacted, his expression changed drastically, and he slapped his forehead. F***CK. As mentioned earlier, the maximum coverage range of the eye of disaster was within 3 feet. Tang Un didn't perform the spell at a fixed point just now. Who would have thought that a moment of distraction would cause Lena to inadvertently step into the coverage range of desire? "Mr. Arthur." Just as Tang Un hurriedly canceled the command, Lena raised her head slightly, bit her lip, and blushed. "Actually, I like you. Tisk one step too slow." He focused on canceling the command. F***CK. Naughty again. Tang Un looked slightly embarrassed when he heard this. He patted the eye of disaster, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. The eye of disaster had 2 methods to control people's minds. One was to directly instill negative emotions and forcibly issue a controlling command. The second was to provoke and exaggerate the emotions in the target's heart, making them act impulsively. This also achieved the purpose of control. With the example of the previous example, Tang In naturally thought that Lena's confession belonged to the former, which was the control effect of the Eye of Disaster. It had nothing to do with her, so naturally, he didn't think too much about it. This was a beautiful misunderstanding, but unfortunately, it happened at the wrong time. Stuttering, Lena, who came back to her senses, remembered what she had just said, and her mind suddenly went blank. Her face was like a ripe apple, bright red and extremely attractive. Tang Yin thought that Lena was as embarrassed as he was, so he held his forehead and sighed. How should I end this? He spread out his hands. This is not your fault. It's all the fault of the Eye of Disaster. I'm also at fault. I was the one who gave the command. The more he explained, the more chaotic it became. In the end, Tang had to shut up. In this case, Lena naturally wouldn't listen to any explanation. Her mind was filled with the thought, I confessed? I actually confessed. I'll definitely be rejected. What should I do? What will Arthur think of me? Both of them had their own thoughts, and the scene was naturally even more awkward. After the two domestic geese on the side returned to normal, they also lost their desire to look for food and curled up in the corner again. The courtyard was suddenly silent. At this moment, a figure suddenly rushed into the courtyard, as if there was something urgent. It wasn't until he passed by Lena that he realized that the atmosphere was a little strange, and he instantly stopped. Oh, it's Harry. What's wrong? Did something happen? Tang turned his head and was overjoyed when he saw that it was Harry. My King Savior. He hurriedly greeted him loudly, and with this somewhat overly enthusiastic attitude, the awkward atmosphere was slightly dispelled. Harry seemed to really have something urgent. He didn't care about gossip and hurriedly rushed to Tang inside and whispered something in his ear. His long and narrow eyes narrowed instantly. The joy on Tang's face quickly receded like a tide, and it was replaced by a cold, murderous intent. After a pause, he exhaled and looked at Lena, who was still lowering her head. Sorry, I need to go out immediately. Let's go. After a simple explanation, he waved his hand and hurried out of the courtyard with Harry. It's okay. When Lena looked up again, the courtyard was empty except for the two trembling domestic geese in the corner. She opened her mouth and finally sighed, murmuring silently, I'm okay. Chapter 801. Late at night, in an unknown, small city hundreds of miles away from Coldwater City. The dome was gloomy, and the moon and stars were nowhere to be seen. Only the drizzle of cold rain fell on this small city that was devoid of the hustle and bustle of the day, adding to the desolation. The slums in the southern part of the city had long since fallen into darkness. There were basically no traces of pedestrians on the wide streets. Occasionally, they would stumble across drunkards who did not know where their homes were. At this moment, all of a sudden, clop, 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 horse hooves galloped swiftly and violently. It sounded like war drums from afar, instantly breaking the silence. Hearing the sound, a drunkard in the middle of the street subconsciously turned his head. In his hazy state, he saw dozens of riders turn a corner not far away and rush over with the momentum of wind and thunder. Before he could react, they were already in front of him. It was unknown whether it was because of an emergency or because they were very confident in their riding skills. But when these riders saw the drunkards in the middle of the street, they did not seem to have any intention of slowing down and charged straight over. The drunkard cried out in alarm. F***CK. At this critical moment, the drunkard's drunkenness instantly dissipated. He hurriedly jumped to the side and rolled in a sorry state. Whoosh! The horses whistled past, and their hooves stepped into the potholes of the street, splashing up countless filthy water. F***CKU. The drunkard choked out the curse word, wiped the muddy water off his face, and immediately flew into a rage. Are you rushing to your death? Huh? When he got up and turned his head, the street was empty. The dozens of riders from before had already run past this street. The continuous drizzle was still falling silently. Ignoring the drunkard's angry curses, the dozens of riders ran past several streets and finally stopped in front of an abandoned house in the corner of the slums. As soon as he got off his horse, a few figures appeared out of nowhere and quickly came up to him, their voices sorrowful. "Boss, Handy, no need to say anything, come to me." After passing through the broken wooden door, they walked onto a small path paved with broken bricks and tiles. Looking up, they saw the main door of the house with a dim yellow light. Their footsteps were hurried, and in just a few short breaths, everyone walked in together. The house was simple and crude. There was an oil lamp, a makeshift bed made of several tables, and a white cloth covering something on it. Other than that, there was no other furniture or decoration in the house. But it was precisely because of this that it didn't seem too crowded, even when a dozen people walked in. The person who walked in first didn't stop. His footsteps were wet, and he walked to the side of the bed with a solemn expression. Pausing for a moment, he slowly lifted the white cloth. Under the flickering candlelight, what came into view was a familiar pale face without a trace of blood. Handy, a member of the first batch of the Gray Space. Since the establishment of the Gray Space, there had been several rounds of recruitment. Excluding David and Michaud, Harry, Luke, Handy, and more than 10 other people were part of the first batch. It could be said that they were different from the rest of the members. At that time, because of Bo Lai's scheme, they were surrounded by Blank's army together with Tangan. Their lives were hanging by a thread. After that, he wandered around the edge of hell several times, experiencing the trials of life and death. In the end, he dug in a collapsed mine for several days and nights without seeing the light of day before he finally managed to escape. It was precisely because of this special experience that although these members of the first batch were nominally Tang unsubordinates, they were actually brothers who had gone through thick and thin with Tang in the past 2 years. Although Tang Un had led the Gray Space into dangerous situations several times, except for one person who died in the mine earthquake, the first batch of members had never been reduced. But now, there was another one. The atmosphere in the room was extremely heavy. Except for the raindrops that dripped from the corners of his clothes from time to time, there was no other sound. It was terrifyingly silent. The white cloth continued to be pulled away. There were many large and small wounds on Handy's body. It was obvious that he had been in a fierce fight when he was alive. The fatal wound was on the left side of his chest, where his heart should have been, but now there was only a big hole, and the wooden plank under him could be seen. Seeing this, Tangan's long and narrow eyes suddenly narrowed. His expression was so gloomy that it seemed like it could drip water. Crack, crack, crack. Clenching his fists tightly and panting like a cow, David's eyes widened like copper bells. His eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. He suddenly roared, "Who is it? Who the F***CK did it?" Seeing his brother who had gone through life and death with him look as if his heart had been dug out, it wasn't just David. The expressions of Harry, Luke, and the others were also extremely ugly. Although they didn't say anything, the frightening ruthlessness that flashed in their eyes from time to time undoubtedly showed their determination for revenge. A middle-aged man with a gloomy expression walked over. He was the person in charge of the local secret agency. He said directly, "It's people from the Temple of Light." Around 3 in the morning, a large group of Knights of Light suddenly appeared in the city and surrounded the original Bounty Hunter Guild branch. At that time, Lorhan D happened to be in the guild and couldn't get away in time. In the end, Bulsh *T. David suddenly waved his hand to interrupt him. He took a step forward and grabbed the middle-aged man's collar with a ferocious expression. If Brother Han D wanted to leave, could those Knights of Light have stopped him? Sorry, I'm not sure. Shaking his head sadly, the middle-aged man didn't look flustered. He only said, "Those Knights of Light came quickly and disappeared even faster. After destroying the Bounty Hunter Guild, they directly left the city and disappeared. That's all I know so far." Hearing this, David became even more anxious and roared angrily, "Trash! You didn't King care about this at all. Enough. Suddenly, a violent roar echoed in the house. Tangan looked over and said coldly, "Let him go." Huff, huff. David's chest rose and fell violently, as if he was hiding an uncontrollable rage that was about to explode in the next moment. However, he also knew that his question was completely unreasonable. After all, if what the other party said was true, then it was indeed impossible to find those Knights of Light who acted so cleanly in such a short time. In the end, he could only snort coldly and slowly let go of the collar in his hand. Tangan turned his gaze to the middle-aged man with a gloomy expression. Pass down the order, mobilize all the secret agencies within 100 miles. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, find these bastards for me. Yes. The middle-aged man accepted the order in a deep voice. He gave a simple salute and directly turned to rush out of the house in the rain. At that moment, "Andy, it's all my fault." Looking at the silent and motionless Handy, Luke grabbed his hair tightly, his eyes red. "If I hadn't swapped the mission area with you earlier, you wouldn't have met with such a disaster. It's all my fault. It's all my fault." Of course, the battle energy circulation channel couldn't only be released in Coldwater City. According to the original plan, each member of the first phase would be in charge of an area that covered all 30 existing branch organizations to ensure that the battle energy circulation channel could be released smoothly. The person who was originally in charge of this small city was actually Luke, but he just happened to be feeling a little unwell a few days ago. After Handy found out about this, he took the initiative to swap areas with Luke so that Luke wouldn't have to travel more than 100 miles. But who would have thought that this unintentional move would cause Handy to become a cold corpse by the time Luke saw him? All right. Tangan frowned slightly, his expression a little gloomy. So what if you didn't swap before? Now that Handy is facing your corpse, do you blame yourself? Although this wasn't nice to hear, it was the truth. Handy's heart hadn't been dug out. In fact, when Tangan saw the fatal wound for the first time, he had already guessed that it was done by the Temple of Light. The reason was very simple. When some clergymen killed so-called evil heretics, as long as it was possible, they would target the other party's heart as the final blow. The meaning behind this was to purify the other party's evil soul. Handy wasn't weak. Although he couldn't compare to David and Michaud, he wasn't someone a mere Knight of Light could stop. From the fact that they could easily target Handy's heart as the final blow, it was obvious that there was an expert among the Knights of Light. Under such circumstances, whether it was Luke or David, no one would be able to survive if they switched places. So, at the end of the day, this was fate. After knowing the inside story, Harry's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His expression changed, and he said anxiously, "Not good. Since the other party already knows that we've taken over the Bounty Hunter Guild's territory, aren't the other cities also in danger?" Oomph. With a cold snort and a wave of his hand, a cold, killing intent flashed across Tangan's face. "It's fine. I'm just afraid that they won't dare to appear." Chapter 802. Don't worry, I'm just afraid that they won't dare to show up. When he formed the assassin organization, Tang unconsciously separated the gray space. He was afraid that people would follow the vine to find the melon and wipe them out. The people temporarily managing the organization were transferred from the secret organization. After what had happened, the secret organization had naturally spread the news long ago, so there was no need to worry about being ambushed again. Of course, Tang hoped that those people would strike again and reveal their whereabouts so that they could avenge Handy. Squinting his eyes and looking at Handy's cold corpse, Tangan's eyes flickered. He then covered the corpse with a white cloth, took a few steps back expressionlessly, and bowed silently with David and the others, speaking of which, Tangan was also in the wrong. Previously, when the Bounty Hunter Guild was leaderless, they took over 30 branch locations. The Temple of Light definitely knew about this. After all the higher-ups of the guild were dead or injured. The Temple of Light would definitely send people down to reorganize the management, and with a little investigation, they would naturally know the guild's current situation. Of course, even if they knew the details, logically speaking, the Temple of Light should not be in a hurry to intervene. After all, their current situation was really not good, especially after Sylvia took the initiative to expose them. The Temple of Light was even more passive and was in an awkward situation where they could not even fend for themselves. Moreover, Tang In was preparing to publicize the battle energy channel, so it was naturally impossible for him to move away from the original branch location in a short time. But who would have thought that under such circumstances, the Temple of Light would still choose to make a move and ambush the branch location? It was a completely unreasonable move, and it even seemed more like they were acting out of spite. But due to a freak combination of factors, it just so happened to give Tang In and the others a heavy blow. This was really fate. 3 minutes of silence. Phew! After letting out a long breath, Tang In straightened his body, his eyes gloomy. Handy, rest in peace. This matter will not end just like this. I dare not say anything else, but I'll make half of the Temple of Light accompany you in death, boss. David walked over with red eyes, his face full of murderous intent that could not be concealed. Tell us, what should we do? Let's bury Han Di first. Harry took a deep breath and continued dejectedly. Those bastards are obviously planning a sneak attack. Even if we activate the secret organization, it will be difficult to find them in a short period of time. David opened his mouth and was about to object. A debt of blood must be repaid with blood. Burying Handy was a must, but before that, he had to use the heads of the Radiant Knights as a sacrifice. But after pausing for a moment, David finally shut his mouth in disappointment. He had to admit that Harry's words made sense. Judging from the movement style of the Knights of Light, it was obvious that they had the wretched idea of changing places after a slash. It was undoubtedly impossible to catch them immediately. Handi's body couldn't wait that long, so he could only bury it on the spot. There's no hurry. Tang In waved his hand and said in a deep voice, a proper burial is necessary, but not now. Luke, I'll give you one night. Find an ice magician and make an ice coffin for Handy. I guarantee that his body will be immortal. Okay. Luke, who was blaming himself, suddenly raised his head and said resolutely with an excited expression, don't worry. Even if I have to kidnap him, I'll kidnap an ice magician. With that, he took a deep look at Handi's body and rushed out the door. Seeing this, everyone's expressions eased slightly. This was also the best solution back then. They would temporarily ensure that Handi's body wouldn't rot, and then find those bastards for a blood sacrifice. Of course, this was also a helpless solution. David endured it, but in the end he still said in a muffled voice, then, boss, can we only wait now? Of course not. Tang In raised his head slightly and looked at the drizzle outside the door. He suddenly asked an unrelated question. When do you think the rain will stop? David was stumped for words and couldn't come back to his senses. On the side, Harry subconsciously looked outside the door and guessed. The rain won't last long. The weather has been good recently. It should stop before tomorrow morning. Nodding non-committally, Tang In narrowed his long and narrow eyes. Okay, then I'll collect some interest first. Before the first ray of light shines tomorrow morning, I want to see the heads of 10 bishops here. He turned his head with a calm expression. Is there a problem? A moment later, in front of the dilapidated house, the sound of horse hooves thundered again as they galloped out of the city in all directions. Tang In walked out of the main house and stood under the eaves with his head raised. The cold rain poured down, and he felt a slight chill. The other world wasn't a society governed by law. Even Tang In himself often fell into dangerous situations. Thus, Tang In was actually mentally prepared for the possibility that the people around him might one day die on the battlefield or at the hands of the enemy. But what he didn't expect was that the first batch of members of the Gray Space would still be able to survive despite facing so many storms and narrowly escaping death. But now, in this seemingly inadvertent small mission, Handy had suffered a huge setback and would never be able to get up again. F***CK. With a low roar, Tang In, who had been holding back until now, suddenly had a ruthless expression. An overwhelming, murderous intent burst forth. The fine rain curtain under the eaves seemed to have been hit by a sudden gust of wind. It instantly drifted out at a 90-degree angle and made sizzling sounds. Handy's death was too sudden, and it also disrupted Tang Un's previous arrangements. However, regardless of whether the temple's actions were intentional or purely to vent their frustrations, Meng Qiao had definitely crossed the line. But now he had undoubtedly touched Twain's reverse scale, and he would not rest until he was dead. He held out the eye of disaster and muttered softly, "I originally planned to use you after I had complete control over you. But now, since someone insists on being despicable, then don't blame me." The next morning, the morning sun slowly rose from the eastern horizon. The color looked a little bleak, and there wasn't much vitality. However, the drizzle finally disappeared. If it weren't for the lush trees that had been washed clean by the street, no one would have noticed that the drizzle had sneaked in last night. West of the city, a small city church. As soon as the melodious bell rang, more than 100 people gathered outside the church. Then, the noise began to spread, and, as more and more people joined in, it became more and more chaotic. "Come out. You don't deserve to stay in this holy church. Come out and give us an explanation. Archdeacon Marlip, is it true that you kept a mistress, and you misappropriated the donations without permission? Are you worthy of the god statue above your head? This is blasphemy against the gods. Get out here." Separated by the iron railings outside, the crowd that had gathered looked unusually angry. It could be said that if looks could spew out anger, this church would have been burned to ashes. And outside the crowd, the passers-by did not have any special expressions when they saw this, as if they were already used to it. Originally, ever since the many dark secrets about the Temple of Light were exposed, believers came almost every day to vent their dissatisfaction. At first, the commotion was quite big, but as time passed, the ordinary people became accustomed to it. And because of this, the church had not opened for many days, as if they planned to shamelessly drag it out until the situation completely calmed down. "Lord Bishop, it has already been a week. Why are these believers still causing trouble?" In the temple, in front of the colored crystal glass, a middle-aged clergyman wearing a white robe had a bitter expression as he said helplessly to a curly-haired old man wearing a white robe with golden edges. The curly-haired old man was the archdeacon of this church, Marlip, who the believers outside were scolding. Of course, the title of archdeacon was not welcomed anywhere, so the middle-aged clergyman and the other subordinates all referred to him as Lord Bishop. Some ignorant idiots. Let them cause trouble. They won't be able to cause any trouble. Waving his hand, Marlip was rather calm. Although he could faintly hear his name constantly being called from outside, he acted as if he did not hear it and had a calm appearance. But it can't go on like this. Now, even the people who buy food do not dare to go out. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, the middle-aged clergyman had an anxious expression. It is not good to go out during the day. Then let the people who buy food go out at night. But, waving his hand, he said, "All right, no buts. What do you think we should do? These are believers. The guards can't do anything about it. We can't go out and argue with them." After a pause, Marlip patted the middle-aged clergyman's shoulder and comforted him. "Don't worry, it will pass. Besides, although they're causing a ruckus now, have you seen any believers rushing into the church? What does that mean? It means that they know what can and cannot be done. So as long as we endure this period, everything will naturally calm down." It had to be said that although this Marlip didn't have a good reputation, he hadn't lived his life in vain. What he said sounded very reasonable, and the truth was more or less the same. The believers outside hated these hypocritical clergymen, but they still revered and believed in the God of Light. Therefore, they naturally did not wish to destroy the sacred and solemn church. The middle-aged clergyman heard this and nodded reluctantly. Then, as if he had thought of something, he looked around and asked curiously, "Where is Lord Bishop? Why haven't I seen him all morning? He's probably still in his bedroom. Why are you looking for him?" Marlip pursed his lips, seemingly disapproving of the real Lord Bishop. It's nothing. Well, I was hoping that Lord Bishop could go out and talk to the believers. It should be effective. The middle-aged clergyman looked hesitant, but still forced himself to say it. In fact, logically speaking, Marlip's identity as the deputy bishop was enough to communicate with the believers. But his reputation was not very good now. Not to mention communicating. Even if he was not beaten up, he would be praised for the quality of the believers. Marlip's face darkened when he heard this. He waved his hand angrily. What is there to talk about? The guy is not. He stopped himself in time and forced the words "not good" back. He snorted coldly with a gloomy expression. To be honest, Marlip felt a little aggrieved. What misappropriation of charity funds, keeping mistresses, etc. Yes, I admit to all these, but I'm not the only one who does this. Why do they keep targeting me? It's completely unfair. While Marlip was secretly annoyed, the middle-aged clergyman's body shook as if he had suddenly seen something. He widened his eyes and pointed. Sir, look at a ghost." "Huh?" Marlip paused and opened his mouth. His expression was as if he had really seen a ghost. His face was full of shock. When he came back to his senses, he jumped up like a rabbit that had been shot and rushed to the church door. Damn it. Why is she here? Open the door. Hurry up and open the door for me." The middle-aged clergyman did not move. He looked through the colored crystal glass and saw a beautiful woman squeezing through the crowd not far away from the iron railings. She pointed in his direction as if she had gone mad. Her sharp curses could be heard clearly. "Marlip, you old bastard, not paying for your mistress. I'm not done with you today." He touched his forehead and muttered to himself. This is the end. When Marlip rushed out of the church in a hurry, there was already chaos outside the iron railings. Previously, although there were believers who scolded Marlip for having a mistress, it was after all just a groundless rumor with no evidence. But now that the person involved had appeared, the effect was naturally different. Pooh, are you really going to do it? Over there. Marlip came out. F***CK. He still dares to come out? Smash him to death. The crowd was enraged, and the noise that had already weakened suddenly soared, spreading far and wide across several streets. Marlip's footsteps paused. His face suddenly turned pale. He knew that he had made a mistake that could not be any worse. It would be fine if he did not come out. If he came out, wouldn't he be admitting that he had a ghost? Of course, it was even more impossible to retreat now, because it would be seen as a guilty conscience. Damned stupid woman. Marlip cursed in a low voice. He calmed his mind and raised his head. He put on a kind and benevolent face and walked over. What happened? Before he finished speaking, a rotten tomato drew a beautiful parabola and accurately hit the bridge of Molly Pooh's nose. Brilliant red instantly spread out. He cried out involuntarily, but it was immediately drowned out by the crowd's laughter and cheers. Damn it! Marlip angrily wiped off the red juice on his face and rushed to the iron railing. He pointed at the gorgeous woman and shouted, "Slander! This is a blatant slander. I don't know you, crazy woman. You old bastard, you don't recognize me after pulling up your pants. I'll kill you." Tightly clinging to the iron railing, the gorgeous woman stretched out her arm with a twisted expression as if she wanted to grab Marlip. Everyone, don't believe him. I'm this old bastard's mistress outside. I live on Spirit Husbandry Street in North City. Right? I remember that his sex is short and dark, like a caterpillar. It's very disgusting. Wow. There was an uproar. Hearing this, the believers subconsciously looked at Marlip's lower body. Their expressions suddenly changed and were extremely strange. Step. Marlip heard this and felt his blood rush to his brain. His old face turned red. He trembled and pointed at the gorgeous woman. He opened his mouth, but could not say a word. Anger, shame. In addition to all kinds of emotions, there was also a little doubt. Why would his mistress suddenly rush out to expose him? What good would it do her? Furthermore, looking at that twisted and ferocious face, Marlip instinctively felt that something was wrong. She seemed to have gone crazy. Without waiting for Molly Pooh to figure out what was going on, the gorgeous woman grabbed the iron railing and shook it continuously. She shouted as if she had gone mad. "Old bastard, I've served you with all my heart and soul, but you're still not paying me. You?" For some reason, a great sense of grievance suddenly rose in Marlip's heart. He instantly suppressed his rationality and shouted hysterically, "Nonsense! When did I not pay you?" As soon as he finished speaking, the scene suddenly became silent. The believers looked at Marlip in shock. This, he admitted himself? How shameless. I didn't mean that." Coming back to his senses, cold sweat instantly covered Marlip's forehead. He did not know why he had said those words impulsively. It was as if his brain was completely out of control. However, now was obviously not the time to think about this. Looking at the pairs of angry eyes in front of him, Marlip knew that he was done for. The church was also done for. Sure enough, someone let out the first roar. "Kill him." Then there was a response. Then the crowd swarmed forward like a tide. With a bang, the iron railing was pushed to the ground, and the crowd rushed in crazily. Marlip was too close. Caught off guard, he was naturally submerged in the first moment. In the chaos, he vaguely saw an ordinary-looking young man with long and narrow eyes, calmly retreating from the crowd. As if sensing his gaze, the young man glanced over. The corner of his mouth suddenly curled up. He waved an oval object in his hand and smiled unusually brightly. Who was this? What was that? Although there was no direct evidence, for some reason, Marlip subconsciously felt that this matter was caused by the other party. However, before he could figure it out, countless punches and kicks fell like raindrops. Inside the church, panicked shouts could be heard. Lord Bishop, something's happened, something's happened." The middle-aged clergyman from before ran all the way to a house at the back of the church and knocked on the door anxiously. After knocking more than 10 times without any results, the middle-aged clergyman gritted his teeth and kicked the wooden door open. He rushed in. "Lord Bishop, With a scream, as if he had stepped on some slippery liquid, the middle-aged clergyman fell heavily to the ground. Ignoring the pain, he looked up dizzily. His body shook violently. On the chair in the house, a man dressed in a red robe dressed as a bishop was sitting there paralyzed. The reason why he did not dare to recognize him directly was because the head on this familiar body had disappeared, stunned. He opened his palm. It was red and bloody. When he looked down again, the floor was covered in blood. He opened his mouth. Something happened. Something really happened. Chapter 803. P.S. Bowing to thank the readers for the Shadow Sniper tip. Also, there are some problems with Raccoon's condition recently. He seems to have become lazy. Cough, cough, it has to be changed. I'll give Raccoon 2 days to try to advance the release date and not let the readers wait for so long. 3 days later, in the afternoon, Mountain Stream City, slums. Just as there was always a shadow under the sun, Mountain Stream City, as the holy city of the north, was not inferior to any other northern city in terms of appearance or business situation. However, this could not cover up the fact that it also had the same chronic problems as other cities, which was the existence of slums. Some people were rich and some people were crazy poor. The principle was that simple. Whether one accepted it or not was another matter. At this time, in a dilapidated building in a corner of the slums. As far as the eye could see, the exterior walls of the building were full of holes, leaking air everywhere. It looked like it was on the verge of collapse. Even a homeless person would not choose to live in such a dangerous place that could not shelter from the wind or rain. However, there was now a person on the second floor of the building, half leaning against the broken wall. There were a few balls of blood-stained cotton on the ground beside him, and the smell of medicine was strong. His face was slightly drooping, covered in cold sweat and dust. The person's face could not be seen clearly, but looking at the gray and white complexion, it was obvious that he was in a difficult situation. However, the person in question did not seem to notice. He suddenly turned his head, his white teeth biting the gray cloth tightly. His right hand was firmly tied with a dead knot, forcibly suppressing the bleeding of the wound on his left arm. Phew! After treating the wound, The person looked up and gently exhaled, wiping the cold sweat on his forehead. His expression was slightly relaxed. After that, he did not immediately rest and recuperate. Instead, he stood up with the help of his spear, revealing his curves and long legs. He vaguely looked like a woman. He walked back and forth a few steps, gathering the blood-stained cotton balls and rags on the ground and burning them. The flames suddenly jumped up, and the blood-stained cotton balls burned very quickly, turning into black ash in an instant. However, the rags mixed with the cotton balls continued to burn in the flames, twisting and struggling. The woman did not retreat. She quietly watched the flames, her expression dark and gloomy, as if in a daze. This state lasted for about a few seconds. The woman's ears twitched slightly. She seemed to have noticed something. She pursed her lips, and her dazed expression disappeared without a trace. She raised her long spear slightly, and her awe-inspiring battle intent soared madly. In an instant, it was as if a whirlwind had slipped into the second floor. The burning bonfire on the ground quickly retreated, scattering dust and sparks in the air. The scene was magnificent and spectacular for a moment. At this moment, a few coughs sounded from downstairs, followed by a gentle voice. "It's me, Owens." As soon as he finished speaking, the austere atmosphere on the second floor disappeared, as if it had never appeared. At this time, Owens, who was dressed in plain clothes, walked out of the wobbly stairs. He looked over and was slightly startled. Then, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Why, you clearly know that Mountain Stream City is different from other places. Coming here to cause trouble for the temple. Sigh, it's very dangerous." The woman leaned against the wall again with a calm expression. "It's precisely because this place is different from other places." Okay. Owens was slightly stunned when he heard this. Then, he couldn't help but smile bitterly and nod in agreement. As the holy city in the north, Mountain Stream City undoubtedly had the largest number of believers, and this excellent place was indeed suitable to cause trouble for the temple. At this point, there was no doubt that this woman was naturally Sylvia. Ever since she decided to take the initiative to expose the dark secrets of the temple, Sylvia had traveled thousands of miles, rushing between countless cities and towns. It could be said that she spared no effort, and the impact of this was undoubtedly huge. No matter how the temple advertised that Sylvia had fallen into an evil heresy, her glorious reputation was still there. As a result, it naturally caused a huge uproar among the believers. Some people believed it, and some people slandered it. But whether they believed it or not, these countless controversies were enough to make the temple suffer and completely fall into a passive position. And as a result, the temple naturally wouldn't let Sylvia go. After they shed all pretense of cordiality, in just a few days, several groups of people came one after another to kill Sylvia. It was believed that if it weren't for Sylvia's extreme familiarity with the temple's hunting methods and Tang En's unintentional perfect disguise, Sylvia would have carried countless infamy and returned to the embrace of the god of light by now. Healing magic can't be used, it will be detected. Take it, this is the medicine I secretly bought. It's all high-quality goods, and I've saved it for several years. Well, you expose your whereabouts here today. I'm afraid that there will be experts coming tonight. Later, I'll arrange for you to leave the city. Well, as a friend, I've done my best. So if you're caught, don't betray me." As he spoke, he handed over bottles and jars. Owens had his usual warm smile at the corner of his mouth. He shrugged and joked, and soon eased the slightly dull atmosphere here. After re-bandaging her wound, Sylvia pursed her lips, hid her hypocritical gratitude, and asked directly, "Is there any news from the Puritans?" "Please, the Puritans' forces are in the headquarters. How can there be news so quickly?" Shaking his head, Owen spread out his hands and said, "And who in the temple doesn't know that I'm close to you? My every move is being monitored. TSK, TSK. Fortunately, I wasn't reported when I went easy on you in Holy Light City. Otherwise, I would have no future as a spy." Sylvia frowned slightly. "Then why are you here today?" Ah, can you have some conscience? I risked my life to send you the medicine, and you're still quite reluctant now? After a pause, looking at Sylvia's frown, Owen's eyelids twitched, and he quickly put away his aggrieved expression. Well, I'm here to tell you a big news. Sigh, I'm afraid the temple is going to fall this time. Hmm. You've been avoiding the pursuit for the past few days, so you don't know what happened. Well, in more than 10 towns in the north, believers have collectively rioted, shouting the slogan of driving the temple out of the north, and completely destroyed the churches in the city. Sylvia was shocked when she heard this and cried out, "What? How is that possible?" As mentioned before, although the believers had a lot of opinions about the clergy, they still had a high respect for the belief in the God of light and the solemn church. When Tang In and Xiao Weian made a scene in the headquarters of the Northern Temple, many believers stood on the periphery, but even if they saw all kinds of ominous signs, no one crossed the rules and broke in without permission. This was a clear proof. It was precisely because of this that although the Temple of Light was now in the teeth of the storm and on the verge of collapse, in fact, their foundation had not been destroyed much. They continued to exude inviolable power and were secretly doing some small things. For example, a large-scale pursuit of Sylvia, or an assassin organization that took the time to sneak attack Tang. And I also want to say that it's impossible, but now the facts are in front of us. Spreading out his hands, Owen sighed bitterly. The temple is blocking the news in this regard. But how can this news be blocked? Alas, this is the fuse. The Temple of Light is in trouble. This was the reason. If there was no case on the table, no matter how disappointed the believers were with the Temple of Light, they would not think about overthrowing the solemn churches around them. But once this gap was opened, it would inevitably cause a chain reaction, like a flood that broke through the dam, and the consequences would be unimaginable. More importantly, the identity of the believers and the position of the Temple of Light. It was known that the reason why the Temple of Light could have such a great force today and stand on the continent for thousands of years without falling. It relied on the unconditional support of the vast number of believers, which was also the foundation of the Temple of Light. But it was precisely this stable foundation that could also be the fuse that could detonate and destroy everything. The reason was very simple. The Temple of Light could use thunder to suppress the enemies who provoked them. But would they dare to use the same method on the vast number of believers? Obviously, unless the Temple of Light wanted to be destroyed, they would definitely not dare to. Therefore, this was a battle that the Temple of Light was destined to be passive in. This was also the reason why water could carry a boat, but it could also capsize it. And when that time came, drive the Temple of Light out of the north would not just be a slogan. And this was the truth. You don't know how chaotic it is outside now. Mountain Stream City is still fine, and we haven't received the news yet. But 300 miles to the north, the towns there are already in chaos. In just 2 or 3 days, churches in the city have been destroyed one after another. And, well, this matter can't be discussed openly. In the conflict, hundreds of clergymen have already lost their lives and many believers have also died. This matter will definitely not be resolved peacefully now. Wait! After being stunned for a moment, Sylvia suddenly frowned. 2 or 3 days? Are you sure it's only been 2 or 3 days? And there's such a big commotion? Haha, have you noticed? As if he had expected this question, Owens nodded. That's right. Within 2 or 3 days, believers in more than a dozen cities have rioted at the same time as if they had made an agreement. Of course, this is abnormal. After a pause, he shook his head and sighed. There's an expert behind the scenes manipulating things. What a good method. Who is it? Haha, you know this person too. He's an old acquaintance of ours. Looking at Owens's complicated expression with a bitter smile and speechlessness, Sylvia's heart suddenly moved, and she blurted out, Tang In. Yes. Owens simply nodded, and then shook his head. A self-deprecating smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. You may not know, but the Zachary we saw at the Temple of Light headquarters that day was actually Tang in disguise. Haha, I used to praise myself for being meticulous and observant. I didn't expect him to swagger in front of me, and I couldn't see through it. It's really embarrassing. Sylvia was also stunned when she heard this. She had sensed that there seemed to be something wrong with Zachary at that time, but it was just an intuition and she didn't pay much attention to it. She didn't expect this feeling to be true. After sighing with some frustration, Owens continued. According to the 2 warning light beams at that time, Tang In stole a total of 2 things from the Temple of Light. One is the Demon Skull, and the other should be the transaction record between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. Yes, it's the reasonable evidence of the Temple of Light's crimes that suddenly appeared a few days ago. I see. That's fine. The Temple of Light has only themselves to blame for doing this. With a light snort, Sylvia frowned and asked, "But what does this have to do with him encouraging believers to cause trouble?" "Let me finish. I just said that he's a master. This is my sincere admiration. Do you know that he disguised himself as Zachary to steal evidence while sending people to secretly swallow up the Bounty Hunter Guild's branch stronghold? TSK. This is a beautiful move. Others would wipe their mouths clean and leave after eating, but he's even taking away his rice bowl." Smacking his lips, Owen's expression of admiration did not seem to be fake, but he seemed to be a little disapproving of Tang's unsightly table manners. On the other hand, Sylvia raised her eyebrows, and there was a hint of a smile in her eyes. She secretly thought that this was really that guy's style, but what Xiao Weian herself did not realize was that her perception of Tang In as an enemy was gradually changing. Previously, she could not wait to stab him to death, but now she no longer deliberately resisted. The Temple of Light only learned about this situation a few days ago. Bishop Byron and the others were furious when they learned about it. However, at that time, the Bounty Hunter Guild had already been exposed, and they did not dare to think about taking it back. But at the same time, they were not willing to let Tang In take it away just like that. So they decided to send a team to launch a sneak attack to vent their frustrations. Stupid. Hearing this, Sylvia could not help but curl her lips and scold. It should be known that the Temple of Light did not even have time to take care of itself. But just to vent their frustrations, they rashly made such a move that was very likely to anger the other party. If this was not stupid, then what was? Owens nodded in agreement. Who said it wasn't? But there are indeed many masters in this team. Well, the leader is Head Knight Reiser, and there's also Carl. Carl? Which Carl? Sylvia was stunned when she heard this, and asked subconsciously. Who else could it be? It's the bloody butcher who brutally massacred several villages 2 years ago. You tracked him for more than half a month before finally capturing him. Carl. It's really him? Startled, Sylvia's face suddenly turned gloomy. Hasn't he been locked up in the headquarters prison all this time, awaiting trial? He shrugged. I used to think so too, but recently when I was collecting blackmail materials on the Temple of Light, I found out that Carl had been released as early as a year ago. Sigh. He probably felt that his strength was not bad and was somewhat useful. Someone arranged for him to join the Bounty Hunter Guild assassination team, specializing in dealing with matters that the Temple of Light could not easily deal with. Well, bang. He slammed his fist on the ground, causing the dangerous building to tremble. Xiao Weian bit her lips, a cold light flashing in her eyes. Fine. Good. Such a Temple of Light. So be it. Naturally, these were words of anger, but it could also be seen that Sylvia was extremely angry and disappointed with the Temple of Light's actions. Waving his hand, Owens's face was full of sarcasm. Haha, don't worry, retribution has come. With such a strong team taking action, launching a sneak attack on a bounty hunter guild that has changed owners would naturally be easy. In fact, they did do it, but this attracted Tang Un's anger. He paused and raised his index finger. In one night, the heads of 10 bishops of the 10 churches fell to the ground. The next day, the believers' rebellion kicked off. Haha, although I'm very curious about what method Tang and used to be able to motivate the believers so efficiently. But what I want to know more now is, when those big shots find out that this unmanageable situation is the result of them venting their anger, what kind of expressions will they have? Ha! Motivating the believers? Listening to Owens's happy laughter, Sylvia's heart skipped a beat. She felt that she seemed to have grasped some information, but she could not connect it at the moment. In the end, she shook her head and temporarily suppressed this feeling. The corners of her mouth twitched slightly, and she also showed a sarcastic smile. "Oh, that must be quite interesting. I'm looking forward to it." Pause for a while, waiting for Owens's laughter to weaken a little, she asked, "By the way, where is that temple team now?" Stopping laughing, Owens turned to look at her in surprise. "Why, you want to catch that Carl again?" "That's right. But this time, I won't send him to the court of justice, but directly send him to the believers as evidence." "That's a good idea, but there's still Reiser. His ranking among the knight commanders is higher than yours." With his eyebrows raised, Owens seemed to have thought of something. With a gossipy expression, he leaned closer and asked, "I heard a rumor that Reiser challenged you to a duel in private last year." Tell me who won. I'll tell you where they are now." "How about it? Fair, right?" P.S. Chapter 691 mentions this. There were a total of 12 knight commanders in the Temple of Light, and a grand competition was held every 3 years to rank them according to their strength. If it was in the past, regardless of the outcome of the private duel, Sylvia would not talk about it behind their backs. But now that she had become a traitor of the Temple of Light, she was naturally more open-minded about it. She glared at Owens, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Reiser's talent is outstanding, but his state of mind is not open enough, and his perspective on the path of martial arts is also rather narrow. If he can study the teachings of the Temple of Light for 3 years, his strength will definitely reach a whole new level." She did not say it explicitly, but Owens naturally understood what she meant. He laughed and said, You can just say that he's narrow-minded and that his martial arts realm has stagnated. TSK, looks like you've won." Sylvia did not deny it, but she frowned and said impatiently, "All right, cut the crap. Tell me the address." "It's no use telling you." I'm not kidding. They're roughly near Moscow now, but it's definitely too late for you to go now." Spreading his hands, Owens looked at Sylvia's doubtful gaze with a strange expression and explained, "I've been paying attention to the Believers' Rebellion, and it suddenly stopped around this morning. You know Tang-un, he's definitely not someone who gives up halfway. So what do you think would make him willingly give up this great situation for the time being?" She asked and answered her own question. "There's no need to guess. Reiser is lucky to have been transferred back at the last minute, but Carl is definitely dead. The only difference is how many times Tang-in slashes him depending on his mood." Chapter 804. P.S. Well, 2 hours earlier today. Keep up the good work. Still in the afternoon, in an area in the western district of Moscow. Most of the cities in the other world were messy, with buildings of varying heights. Overall, there was basically no beauty to speak of. However, due to the great disparity in status, there were some faint patterns in this mess. First of all, the Eastern District was basically the area where the nobles lived and outsiders were not allowed to enter or leave at will. This was a phenomenon that was almost universal across the continent. The Southern District generally had the chronic problems of other cities, which were the slums. Most of the people living in the Northern District were rich and elite merchants, and all kinds of shops were the densest there. As for the Western District, it was slightly more chaotic. It was the gathering place of some guilds, black markets, gangs, and so on, with some unstable elements. Of course, this pattern was not a standard, and there would definitely be differences in specific cities. But, generally speaking, this was basically the situation. The Golden Lion Gang was a local gang in Moscow. Although the name sounded very loud, it did not have much of a presence among the gangs in the Western District. There were about 100 people in the gang, and none of them were ruthless. They managed a few remote streets, collected protection fees, and loan sharked. At most, they were just a low-level gang that could barely make ends meet. But now, this small gang seemed to have offended someone. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, 100 big men with unfriendly expressions and sabers gathered from the surrounding alleys one after another, surrounding the main entrance of the Golden Lion Gang. F*CK. Get your boss out here. How dare you touch the people of our Heavenly Eagle Gang? I think you bastards are tired of living. Ugh. Brothers, is there some misunderstanding here? Misunderstanding my ass. Weren't the people who ambushed us at Blue and White Flower Alley last night from your Golden Lion Gang? I F*King saw them walk in here with my own eyes. Okay, don't talk nonsense with them. How about you hand him over? Or we'll flatten your Golden Lion Gang today. Don't say I'm not giving you face. I'll give you 5 minutes to think about it. Choose for yourself. It was noisy, and the atmosphere was tense. It looked like a fight would break out at the slightest disagreement. However, Golden Lion Gang's encampment was strangely quiet. Even the gang members who heard the clamor outside were cowering against the walls while they peeked at the hall. They did not have the ruthlessness that a gang member should have. There was nothing they could do about it. Their boss, who was also the gang leader nicknamed Golden Lion, was standing obediently by the door of the hall with his head lowered. He looked like a sheep that had seen an evil dragon, and his face was full of fear. And the source of this fear, in the hall, was an argument. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of someone slamming the table was heard. Wait, 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 wait until when? You've only taken action once in a few days, and you call yourselves Temple Knights? Why are you so cowardly that you're worse than a thief? Shut up. Carl, I'm warning you, don't go too far. The higher-ups naturally had their reasons for doing so. You only need to cooperate with us. You have no right to interfere with other matters. Wow, you've got guts. With a thumbs up, a middle-aged man with a fierce face and a burly body like an iron tower stood up and took a step forward with a ferocious look on his face. How many years has it been? It's rare to see someone who dares to speak to me, the bloody butcher, like this. You've got guts. His tone was dragged out, and it sounded like a threat. The Golden Lion Gang's leader, who was standing outside the door, immediately shivered. He could not forget that 3 days ago, this man who looked like a butcher walked to the entrance of the Golden Lion Gang with a ferocious look on his face. He waved his axe casually, and in an instant, he cut the 2 guards into 4 pieces. Then he easily killed his way here, patted his shoulder, and said that he had taken over this place. You've got guts too. Some people were afraid, but others did not believe it. Standing in front of this man were 2 knights in holy armor. Their expressions did not change. But 2 days ago, in front of Head Commander Reiser, you didn't seem to have the guts to show up here. Although the words were said calmly, the sarcasm in them was very obvious. The middle-aged man named Carl narrowed his eyes. His fierce-looking muscles trembled, and his iron tower body leaned forward slightly. His shadow completely covered the knight who spoke. So, you think you're as strong as Reiser? Huh, do you want to spar? I can let you use one hand. This knight was only Reiser's assistant. His strength was naturally not as strong as Reiser, and he was also not as strong as Carl, who had the title of the Bloody Butcher. Hearing this, he held his breath. Although his back was still straight and his expression was calm, he could not reply under the heavy pressure. He simply pursed his lips and remained silent. At this time, the knight who was sitting at the back looked a little angry. He said in a neutral tone, "Who doesn't know the name of the Bloody Butcher? Let alone using one hand. Even if the 2 of us attacked together, we wouldn't be able to withstand your axe." But, pausing for a moment, he emphasized each word. "Lord Carl, are you sure your axe can withstand the entire temple?" As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly froze. Crazy and violent killing intent surged rapidly, filling the entire hall in an instant. It was chilling. At this point, needless to say, these people were naturally the temple team that had ambushed the assassin organization previously. After the successful ambush, this team had been hiding and did not attack again. The reason for this was, of course, not because they were afraid of Tang, In, and the others, but because of the collective rebellion of the believers. The temple's bigwigs no longer had the time to care about this team. They even transferred the leader, Reiser, back. As such, this team, which was equivalent to being frozen, was naturally more careful. After all, the person they had provoked this time was Tang In, a ruthless person who could escape unscathed after wreaking havoc in a northern temple headquarters. In a situation where they obviously did not have the advantage in terms of strength, of course, they did not dare to act rashly. However, this opinion did not seem to be able to reach a consensus. One had to know that in this team, apart from the leader Reiser and a large group of Light Knights who had already left, there was also the assassination team originally affiliated with the Bounty Hunter Guild, which was Carl and a few other evil heretics who had forsaken the darkness for the light. The people of the temple knew how powerful they were because they had suffered greatly at the hands of Tang Yin. However, Carl and the others, who had never even heard of Tang Yin, naturally did not have too many misgivings. Moreover, although Carl and the others had forsaken the darkness for the light, it was mostly because they were forced to do so for their lives. They naturally did not have any sense of belonging to the temple. Of course, the temple had never treated them as their own. They were only tools or lackeys that could be summoned and dismissed at any time. After being suppressed here for a few days, Carl and the others were already impatient. After Reiser, who was the strongest, left, there was no longer any suppression. Their scattered and arrogant nature completely erupted, resulting in the current conflict. One had the advantage in terms of strength. The other had the advantage in terms of mentality. Just as both sides refused to give way to each other, and the heavy atmosphere was about to reach a critical point, a figure appeared at the entrance of the hall and casually said, "There is someone from the Heavenly Eagle gang outside. Should we, His words paused as he felt the surging, killing intent in this place. His footsteps paused outside the hall. Whoosh! A cold wind blew past, and the heavy atmosphere in the hall was swept away. Carl took a small step back and turned his head as if nothing had happened. Heavenly Eagle gang? What's that? The person who came to deliver the news was a young man in leather armor. Clearly, he was not a temple knight, but an evil heretic like Carl who had forsaken the darkness for the light. He spread his hands and said disapprovingly, "Who knows? More than 100 people have come, and they're blocking the entrance now." Seeing that Carl took the initiative to back down, the two Light Knights could not help but sigh in relief. However, when he heard the news, he frowned and looked at the leader of the Golden Lions outside the door. "Did your people provoke the Heavenly Eagle gang?" The reason why they chose to hide in this small gang was to hide from the public. Therefore, they naturally did not want to cause trouble and attract attention for no reason. No. The Golden Lion leader did not dare to offend the Temple Knights. He hurriedly ran over, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, and hurriedly explained, "My people are all in the base and have not gone out for the past few days. It's impossible for them to provoke the Heavenly Eagle gang." Maybe. There was a lot of hesitation in his words, as if he knew something but did not dare to say it. He only secretly glanced at Carl and then quickly lowered his head. Carl was keenly aware of this gaze, and his eyes suddenly widened. "What do you mean? Are you trying to say that I provoked the people outside?" "Yes and no. Looking at the Golden Lion leader who hurriedly waved his hand and denied flatly, the Light Knight at the back instantly narrowed his eyes and looked suspiciously at Carl. He stepped forward and shouted in a deep voice, "What is it? Is it true or not?" Because of a slip of the tongue, the Golden Lion leader was caught in the middle. He looked at the Light Knight and then at Carl. No matter which side he offended, he could not afford to offend. His face immediately turned ashen, and he was extremely conflicted. He say it. Crossing his arms, Carl chuckled twice, looking very relaxed, but his smile looked even more terrifying. "It will be clear if you say it. Let's be reasonable." After making a difficult choice, the Golden Lion leader shook his head, and his expression looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. "No." As soon as his voice fell, the smile suddenly disappeared, and Carl's face sank. "Since it's not you, what was the meaning of your little trick before? Do you think I'm easy to bully, so you want to frame me? Damn it." With a furious roar, he waved his hand, and a fan-shaped blade light instantly slashed down. "Stop." This roar was too late. Chi! A trace of blood appeared on the Golden Lion leader's forehead and quickly slid down the bridge of his nose, neck, and chest. After a short moment, with a bang, his body exploded, leaving only a large mass of blood floating in the middle. Then, whoosh, the light knight closest to him only felt his eyes turn red, and blood spread out, and a strong smell of blood instantly enveloped the entire hall. Silence. This scene happened too suddenly, and no one thought that Carl would suddenly turn hostile. When they came back to their senses, the three people standing in the hall were all splashed with blood. Since you're here to make a living, you should know, TSK tisk. Licking the blood at the corner of his mouth, Carl smacked his lips and took a step forward with a ferocious expression. He tidied up the collar of the dazed light knight, raised his hand, and lightly slapped his cheek. What can you say? What can you say that will kill you? And don't you think so? Of course, these words were not directed at the Golden Lion chieftain that had been split into two. Instead, they were directed at the two knights of light who had spoken rudely. However, no matter how clear they were, in front of the crazy Carl, the two light knights clenched their fists and their lips trembled. Although they seemed angry, they could not hide their fear. In the end, they could not say a word. At this moment, I remember. The young man in leather armor, standing outside the door, suddenly said, Carl, when we went out for supper last night, we seemed to have beaten up a few ignorant guys. Hearing this, Carl was stunned. He let go of the light knight and scratched his head. Really? I drank too much at that time, so I can't remember clearly. Damn, why didn't you say so earlier? What should we do now? Turning his head to look at the corpse of the Golden Lion leader, he shook his head and said, Alas, I've wronged you. Come and collect your boss body. This is my fault, and I apologize. I will pay the burial fee that should be paid. See? Since we're here to make a living, we should be reasonable. It was a farce. Several gang members trembled as they came in to collect their boss body. Carl and a young man in leather armor walked out of the hall, saying that they were going to solve the trouble outside. However, as soon as they left the hall, Carl's face turned cold. F***, who do you think you are? How dare you put on airs in front of me? The young man in leather armor shook his head and laughed at himself. We can't help it. Who told us to be under the control of the temple? I'm afraid we can only be dogs for the rest of our lives. If the temple defined them as evil heretics, as long as they were caught and tried, they would not be able to escape death. But for those like them, who not only did not receive the trial, but could also go out, they would naturally be bound by some kind of restriction by the temple. It was appropriate to say that they would be dogs for the rest of their lives. Hearing this, Carl curled his lips and said, Humph. Even if I'm a dog, not everyone can be the master. Those two bastards. If they don't know what's good for them, I don't mind finding a few explosive crystals to blow them up. Although they were controlled, with the strength of Carl and the others, they would not be able to do anything. The method of triggering the restriction was naturally not something that the two knights of light in the hall could control. So as long as they did not go too far, or as long as they did it secretly, they did not have to worry about their safety. Shrugging his shoulders, the young man in leather armor did not express any opinion. It was enough for them to have a tacit understanding. Although they had joined the Temple of Light, they were not good people. If he was provoked, he would have no psychological pressure to bite back in the dark. Let's go and meet the Sky Eagle gang. Carl's mouth twitched slightly, revealing a mouthful of dense teeth. Okay. But later, no one will fight with me. I'm in a bad mood, so I'll take advantage of them. No problem. I'll take people to the Sky Eagle gang's residence. While talking and laughing, the fate of the gang was basically decided. This was the absolute right of the otherworldly powerhouses. As for the weak, they had to be prepared to be crushed. After taking a few steps, the young man in leather armor was startled at first, then the corners of his mouth rose. Oh, they're already in? This saves a lot of trouble. Let's hope they can last a little longer. Laughing, Carl licked his lips, revealing a somewhat ferocious expression, and then retreated together with the young man in leather armor. Then, earth-shattering shouts suddenly came from the front. In just a few breaths, the Golden Lion gang's main gate was broken. More than 100 burly men roared and rushed into the small square like a tide. F***CK. How dare you provoke the Sky Eagle gang? Brothers, don't give me face. Just kill them. Block them. F***CK. Don't run if you have the guts. F***CK. When did the Golden Lion gang become the Golden Rat gang? They're so good at dodging. It was noisy, and it was a mess. More than 100 shiny swords were raised and slashed in unison, while the other party covered his head and fled like a rat. It was hard not to be hot-blooded at this scene. However, the hot-blooded Sky Eagle gang members did not notice that although they were very excited, they did not see any blood until now. They did not even kill the few small fries who were guarding the gate before. On the other hand, the Golden Lion gang members who were standing against the wall looked at them with pity and sympathy. As for the few small fries who were guarding the gate, although they seemed to be running in a sorry state, they were not in any danger. At this time, they were secretly leading the 100 burly men into the small square. They looked at each other and smiled, their eyes full of ridicule. It's about time. Carl laughed loudly as he saw a familiar figure in the distance, bypassing the battle scene and cutting off the escape route of the 100 burly men. He could not help but be the first to stop. The young man in leather armor shrugged indifferently. Well then, have fun. After he finished speaking, he made a hand gesture and was about to turn around and leave to destroy the Sky Eagle gang's base. However, at this moment, all of a sudden, boom, 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 the ground trembled slightly, and 3 violent explosions sounded in succession. It was as if thunder had suddenly exploded in the sky, and it stunned everyone. The young man in leather armor blinked and looked at the layers of air billowing from the back of the base, which was the gang hall where they came from. He subconsciously looked at Carl and asked, you did this? It was no wonder that the young man in leather armor asked this question. Just a moment ago, Carl said that he would make a few explosive crystals and blow them up until there was nothing left of them. Are you kidding me? I was just saying. Carl was stunned and frowned gloomily. Besides, even if I really wanted to do this, I didn't have to do it so openly. Isn't this clearly showing the evidence to them? This was the truth. Just like what was said before, even if Carl and the others were really dissatisfied with a member of the Temple of Gods, they would only find an opportunity to do it secretly and then clear their names. This way, the Temple of Gods would not be able to do anything to them when there was no evidence. The young man in leather armor nodded and then turned to look at the 100 burly men not far away. He touched his chin with a puzzled expression and said hesitantly, "Could it be that machetes are no longer popular in gang fights, but explosive crystals?" Chapter 805. The billowing airwaves continued to surge into the sky. However, the lively atmosphere in the field couldn't help but pause for a moment because of this sudden explosion. Then, Carl shrugged his shoulders indifferently. He stretched out his hand and pulled out the one-handed short axe on his back. He grinned maliciously and walked towards the 100 or so men. The young man in leather armor hesitated for a moment and shook his head. He raised his hand and made a gesture to cancel the operation. Previously, he was worried that his whereabouts would be exposed, so he wanted to destroy the Tianyin gang's base. But now that the huge explosion was heard, it would definitely attract a lot of attention. He could not stay here any longer. In this way, there was no need to go to the Tianyin gang's base. As for the Knights of Light, behind him who might be blown up, who cared? Anyway, Carl and the others did not care. It would be best if they were all blown up. They were lucky that they did not die. There was no need to think about rescuing them. It would be nice if they did not take the opportunity to stab them. Hey, where did this big fool come from? Brothers, let's kill him together. Quick, surround him. Chop him, chop him. After a blood-curdling scream, a severed arm flew out, and a small disturbance appeared in the charging team. It had to be said that Carl's fierce appearance, iron tower-like body, and the huge axe that had a one-handed short handle but was extremely exaggerated like a cattail leaf fan, made him look like a living mad demon. At first glance, the visual impact was really terrifying. However, this was a group fight. The gang members naturally would not be so righteous as to fight one-on-one. After the shock, dozens of men who were excited after seeing blood surrounded Carl and waved their shiny machetes. They were about to put on a show where a tiger could not defeat a pack of wolves. "Ha!" Carl laughed and licked his lips with satisfaction. He took a few steps back to avoid the attack. Then he suddenly rushed to the side and knocked away 3 to 5 men with their machetes. He took a step forward and came to the man whose arm had been cut off. He waved his axe ferociously. Whoosh! The one-armed man was thrown out with blood dripping down. After the man screamed, his eyes rolled back and he fainted. F***CK. Bastard bully. Get out of the way, I want to cut off his head with my own hands. There was an uproar. Seeing Carl's outrageous behavior, the surrounding burly men's eyes were filled with rage. Many of them swung their sharp blades at Carl, wanting nothing more than to chop him into minced meat. Outside the battle circle, a figure holding a bow approached the young man and smacked his lips. Tisk, TSK, the Bloody Butcher is indeed the Bloody Butcher. But is there any point in doing this? There is. Seeing Carl circling around the crowd and cutting off the unconscious man's right leg, forcing him to wake up and howl again, the young man in leather armor spread out his hands. At least by doing this, we won't scare everyone away at once. That makes sense. The young man in leather armor and the others naturally didn't care about the 100 or so Heavenly Eagle gang members in front of them. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that any one of them could clear the place in a few minutes. As for why Carl didn't actually kill a single person despite going through so much trouble, that was purely because of his own bad taste. He was worried that he would scare off all the burly men with his sudden outburst. At this time, the young man in leather armor looked around casually and frowned. Hey, where's the... Didn't he go to cut off the escape route? Oh, another leg. Now he's completely turned into a human stick. The figure holding the bow couldn't bear to look at him directly and subconsciously looked at the Golden Lion Gang's main gate in the distance. He was stunned. What? He was there just now? They must be itching for a fight. So he also went into the field. No. The young man in leather armor's expression changed, and his lightning-like eyes instantly swept across the field. Is not here. The Wolf brothers are also gone. The figure holding the bow squinted his eyes and looked carefully, a little surprised. Strange. What's going on? Something is strange, informed Carl. Damn it. With a low shout, the young man in leather armor disappeared instantly and rushed to the field quickly. There, Carl was directly covered by the dense blade light like a storm. He didn't have time to roar, so he withdrew his giant axe and retreated continuously, instantly becoming extremely embarrassed. Who are you? Carl's words were intermittent, but he was both shocked and furious. Under the heavy pressure of the lightning, he could not even utter a complete sentence. There was no answer, only an even more powerful and fierce attack that made people breathless. What the hell is going on? This change was too sudden. Carl was having fun, but before he could react, he was stunned by the strong and domineering attack in an instant, and he had no idea what was going on. When he came back to his senses, he felt the substantial killing intent like a tsunami. Carl suddenly had goosebumps all over his body, and he couldn't help but curse in his heart. Damn it! When did the gang have such a master? He didn't know that the more than 100 strong men who had been constantly teased by him were also stunned on the spot when they saw the dazzling and dense blade light in front of them. Damn it! Who is this, brother? This small blade is so fierce at this time. Get out! With a deafening roar, a green chain was thrown out like a whip, and the fighting aura exploded. The more than 10 strong men in the periphery felt their chests tighten, as if they had been hit by a galloping carriage head-on. Their swollen chests immediately caved in, and they vomited blood and were sent flying. The more than 100 strong men looked at the whirlwind green chain coming at them rapidly, and they couldn't help but rub their eyes, petrified again. Damn it! Is this fighting aura? Before the Heavenly Eagle gang members could react from their shock, The leather-armored young man had already swung the chain more than 100 feet forward, as if he was cutting melons and vegetables. Finally, he arrived in time when Carl was bleeding all over. He threw the chain coldly. "Retreat quickly. Adler, Jackal, and the others are dead. This is a deliberate revenge." After receiving reinforcements, Carl stepped back in large strides to avoid the pursuit of the blade light, which gave him a precious chance to catch his breath and avoid the aggrieved ending of being crushed to death. But then he frowned. Revenge? Just by looking at the name of the Bloody Butcher, one could tell how Carl usually acted. It could be said that it was not too much of an exaggeration to say that he had enemies all over the world. So after hearing that it was revenge, Carl was immediately confused. Where did this hatred come from? But then he thought of the word deliberate, and he suddenly understood. Assassinating him, bombing the Knights of Light. This was the result of the sneak attack a few days ago, and the victim, named Tang, came to kill him. Taking a deep breath, Carl had to admit that the reason why the Knights of Light were so cautious was indeed reasonable. But if he wanted to escape after just meeting face to face, wouldn't his bloody wounds be in vain? Where should he put the name of the Bloody Butcher? Decisively waving his axe, he raised his head and roared. Roar! Waves of dazzling fighting aura surged out like a sea of blood, crazily rolling and covered a large area in a short time. Then died. The axe shadow was heavy, and a large area of bloody blades were swung out, chopping, cutting horizontally, diagonally, all kinds of angles, all kinds of domineering. The power was like wind and thunder, as if it was going to completely cover the whole small square. Naturally, there was a reason for such an AoE attack that didn't care about consumption. Although the battle just now was short, and he had been in a passive state, it wasn't like Carl didn't gain anything. At least he was very clear that the opponent's speed was extremely fast, and his movements were ghostly. He should be walking the path of an assassin. And to deal with such an enemy, it was undoubtedly difficult to achieve success by clumsy chopping. Only this kind of large-scale attack could possibly pose a threat to the opponent. For the time being, not to mention whether this move was effective on the assassin, the young man in leather armor who was closest to him was the first to curse. But he also knew that there was no reason to talk to Carl, the Bloody Butcher. After cursing, his wrist shook, and the chain quickly retracted, heavily hitting the ground of the square, and his body flew up, avoiding the crazy snowflakes of the axe blade. The young man in leather armor could rely on his strength to successfully dodge, but the hundreds of strong men around him who were about to run away when they saw the situation was not good were undoubtedly bloody unlucky. The weak had no human rights, and to participate in the Battle of the Masters was to seek death. In an instant, chi-chi-chi, among the rising and falling screams, there was a strange sound like the whistling of the wind. But in fact, this so-called whistling of the wind was the sound of the bloody axe blade cutting through the fragile human body. Heads, broken arms, legs, half of the body. Just a touch was enough to break the body, and just a touch was enough to kill. In just a few breaths, countless broken limbs were flying in the air, and a large amount of blood was splashing everywhere like worthless well water. The square was a good place, but now it was a mess, like a real Azura purgatory, bloody, terrifying, and shocking. Huff! Huff! Even with Carl's Iron Tower body, after bursting out such a high-frequency and large-scale attack, he could not help but gasp for breath, looking gloomy. He did not have time to adjust his breathing, holding the axe and looking around with his sharp eyes like a hawk's. Except for the young man in leather armor who had just landed, there was no one standing in his line of sight. Dead? Before Carl could feel joy from the bottom of his heart, suddenly, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several sharp, whistling sounds came from afar. Suddenly turning his head, he saw two figures in the distance, running around the square at a fast speed. The figure in front was running wildly, while turning back to shoot an arrow, try to delay the speed of the other. But as soon as the arrow left the bow, the figure behind dodged it first, as if he could predict the future. Not only was he not affected at all, but he also took the opportunity to close the distance. F*CK. Seeing this, Carl's face suddenly darkened. Needless to say, his laborious move just now had been for naught. Not only did the other side easily avoid the range of his axe blade, but he even had the time to chase after the other companion. He came and went so casually, as if he did not take him seriously at all. After a moment of hesitation, Carl's face became gloomy, and he chased after him with big strides. "Let's go. Let's kill him." "Well," the young man in leather armor stretched out his hand as if to stop him, but after a pause, he helplessly shook his head and followed Carl to meet the companion who was seeking help. This choice was not because they were moral. In the face of a disaster, even a husband and wife would run for their lives, not to mention the evil heretics who were mostly cold-hearted. It was not that they did not want to temporarily avoid the danger, but with the abnormal speed of the other side, even if they ran in different directions, they would certainly be caught and then killed one by one. So their only choice now was to gather people to kill the other side. But could they really do it? Chapter 806. In the small plaza, the center of the battle had shifted, leaving the ground full of wailing and groaning. Those were the Heavenly Eagle gang members who had luckily survived the attack of the axe. Although they had managed to survive, they weren't exactly lucky. Carl's ultimate move was aimed at the assassin, and he had truly used his full strength. Apart from the sky, every angle and space was covered by the attack. Under such an attack, even if the Heavenly Eagle gang members didn't die, they would be crippled. The only difference was whether they lost an arm or a leg. Sooner or later, they would have to pay for what they had done. Naturally, all the gang members had this awareness, but they couldn't accept the fact that they had to pay for what they had done. Therefore, when the blood gradually spread to the surroundings of the plaza, the Golden Lion gang members, who had been standing obediently in the corner, swallowed their saliva with difficulty. Then, they slowly moved toward the entrance. Of course, their gazes were fixed on the source of the battle. "Don't move. Turn around, draw your bow, and shoot." Because they had met up with the enemy, Carl and his companion were slightly closer to the frightened bow-wielding companion. When they were about 10 feet away, the two spoke at the same time, decisively ordering the bow-wielding companion to turn around and shoot. Right now, their primary goal wasn't to escape, but to find an opportunity to kill the victim. Therefore, it was very important to take the initiative. Hearing this, the bow-wielding man stopped and turned around. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The bowstring vibrated, and 3 sharp arrows were shot out in a triangular formation. Without waiting for the arrows to fall, he grabbed the quiver again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Another 3 arrows chased after him like shooting stars. This person's archery skills weren't bad. He had shot 6 arrows in a hurry, but they had accurately blocked the pursuer's path of advance. However, after a slight pause, the pursuer's figure swayed imperceptibly. He didn't dodge, and his speed didn't change. Instead, his figure successfully passed through the blockade of arrows. The entire process only took an instant, and it gave the impression that the pursuer was just an illusion. Therefore, the 6 arrows didn't have any effect when they passed through his body. However, this wasn't the case. The bow-wielding man's body trembled, and he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Of course, the pursuer wasn't an illusion. He had only grasped the narrow gap between the first 3 arrows and the last 3 arrows, adjusted his body slightly, and successfully passed through it. Of course, it was easy to say, but to really be able to do it to such an extent, that was shocking. Fortunately, taking advantage of this momentary distraction, Carl and the other 2 managed to catch up. They passed by the bow-wielding man in unison, took a step, stomped their feet, and roared angrily. Their fighting aura flickered, and their chains and giant axes seized the perfect opportunity to swing out one after another. They attacked from afar and slashed at close range and directly pressed down on the pursuing figure. This was also Carl's method of encirclement. Giant axes for close range, chains for medium range, and bows for long range. There was no need for words. The tacit understanding between them was enough to form an effective team in an instant and unleash their greatest power. At this moment, Carl finally had the time to recognize the appearance of the person who attacked him just now. He was a young man with an indifferent expression and an ordinary face. The only distinguishing feature about him was his pair of long and narrow eyes. Well, he was really good material to be a thief and an assassin. Although he was shocked by his opponent's young age, Carl naturally wouldn't be slow in the slightest. Seeing his opponent directly collide with the chain axe, he couldn't help but feel delighted. What's going on? Could it be that his speed was too fast and he couldn't stop? Just as a trace of happiness crept up the corner of his mouth, the next moment, he froze. Boom! One red and one green. The chain and the giant axes smashed together, creating a dazzling effect. Even the ground under their feet shook 3 times. However, Carl and the young man in leather armor secretly cursed in their hearts, because the target that they were confident to hit just now had disappeared. Although you made me wait for a long time. Ding, 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 the dense collision sounds came from behind like raindrops hitting a banana leaf. Just listening to it was enough to make one speechless. But in the end, you saved me time and saved me the trouble of killing you one by one. Carl and the young man suddenly turned their heads, and their pupils rapidly shrank. They saw a pitch-black dagger raised high, and the tip of the dagger reflected a cold luster. It seemed to be moving slowly, but was actually moving fast, and it directly pierced through the forehead of the bow-wielding man. Puff! Blood bloomed evenly, and it was an enchanting and fatal beauty. Thank you. The dagger was pulled out without a trace of blood. The bow-wielding man withered and fell to the ground, silent and motionless. The young man calmly turned around, and his ordinary face was indifferent. Now, it's your turn. Carl subconsciously licked his dry lips, and his face was as gloomy as water, extremely ugly. It was obvious that the young man didn't take them seriously from the beginning. He obviously had the ability to end the battle quickly, but he just waited for the bow-wielding man to run to them, and then directly kill them in front of them. And the purpose was to save time, and he was too lazy to kill them one by one. What the F***CK? Even if they could bear it, they couldn't bear it. You are, Tang In? The young man in leather armor asked tentatively while tightening the chain in his hand. The young man calmly looked at him, and there was no fluctuation in his indifferent eyes. But looking at him, one couldn't help but feel cold all over, as if there was extreme madness and uncontrollable cold killing intent hidden in his eyes. Is this important? Of course. The young man in leather armor shrugged and took the opportunity to move his gradually stiffening body. At least this will let us know who killed us. As you wish. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed like a ghost, and the blade light was already in front of the young man's neck. There was no direct answer, but this action undoubtedly admitted something. It's really you. The young man in leather armor and Carl both jumped back to dodge at the same time and looked at each other bitterly. If they had known that Tang Un was this terrifying, how could they have opposed the idea of the Night of Light? It would have been too late to hide. Unfortunately, there were all kinds of medicine in this world, but there was no medicine for regret. After the previous explosion, there was no sign of the Night of Light for a long time, so he should be dead. And now, there were only 2 of them left in the assassination team, and there was no reinforcements. Naturally, they were no match for him. And perhaps it was the last stage. Tang Un didn't show any mercy. His every movement was full of killing moves, and there was no room for Carl and the young man to breathe. Attack, attack, continue to attack. The situation was completely one-sided. Even ordinary people who didn't know how to fight could see the result of the battle at a glance. Carl and the young man thought that their strength was not low. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been chosen by the Temple of Light to join the assassination team from the prison. But now, in front of Tang In, they only felt that their hands and feet were tied, and they couldn't exert their strength at all. Defense, they couldn't defend. Attack, they died even faster. In the end, they could only retreat, and retreat continuously. At this time, behind the base, a few figures emerge from the top of the wall. Looking over, one of them scratched his head. Don't you feel that the boss has changed a little recently? Change? The person next to him was fascinated. You mean his strength? Well, the boss's strength is indeed improving every moment. I really don't know how he cultivates, and I don't see him deliberately training hard. He shook his head. No, I'm talking about the boss's state. Well, don't you feel that the boss's mood is a little unstable recently? It seems that he gets angry easily, and it's easier to, kill intent. Is that so? Well, David, it seems to be true after hearing what you said, but this is normal. We were all very angry about Handy's death, and the boss's feelings are probably stronger. Is that so? David scratched his head, hesitated, and finally frowned. It feels a little strange. Okay, you're not a woman, so why do you have so many feelings? As long as we kill these people in front of us, after a while, the boss will naturally return to normal. One of them shook his head. If it's really as you said, then the boss will have to wait for a while to recover. The wound on Handy's chest was obviously caused by an expert from the Temple of Light, but the Knights of Light that were killed by us just now were just some small characters. So, although I don't know the reason, it's obvious that the expert hasn't shown himself yet. There are still two people in front of us. The boss will definitely be able to force them to speak. At that time, no matter who it is, he must pay for Handy's life. Chapter 807. The fierce battle was still going on. The square, which was originally flat, had now become a street in a slum. It was full of potholes and was full of devastation. The members of the Golden Lion Gang were trembling with fear as they finally left the stage. They didn't hesitate and didn't even turn their heads to look back. Watching the show for free was certainly good, but it wasn't worth it if they had to pay with their lives. The situation on the stage was getting more and more one-sided. The giant axe didn't make any chopping or attacking movements. It was constantly blocking and blocking. It was a good weapon for close combat, but now it was almost reduced to a shield. The chain, which had a medium to long-range attack, was even more miserable. It couldn't move more than 10 feet and was completely suppressed. But at this time, Carl suddenly laughed crazily. Ha! You don't want to kill us. You still have a favor to ask of us. Am I right? Such a statement was naturally based on facts. Carl had already admitted that he was no match for Tang. Even if he joined forces with a young man in leather armor, it would still be the same. With the strength of the other side, there were clearly several killing moves that broke the balance, but the other side turned a blind eye to them. Or he just took the opportunity to add some scars to them and then stopped. He raised his staff high, but each time, he gently lowered it. This contrast was no doubt abnormal, which was why Carl asked this question. Tangen didn't answer. He was still attacking, with an indifferent expression. He was like a spider that was constantly entangled in a silk web, patient and cruel. Carl took this as a tacit agreement. He waved his axe and struggled to resist. His eyes flashed as he said anxiously, "In fact, there is no big conflict between us. The previous sneak attack was proposed by the Temple of Light. The Knights of Light killed the most people. We were just forced to do it. Moreover, we hate the hypocritical temple as well. They are our common enemy." Pause for a while. He observed Tang Un's expression stop. "We admit defeat this time. If you have any request, just say it. We can be reasonable. As long as we can agree, we will do our best to cooperate. Be reasonable." Okay. The attack didn't stop, but Tang and raised his eyebrows. It seemed that he was a little interested in this proposal. During the sneak attack, you killed a young man with good skills. He was wearing black armor and holding two-handed dagger. Haha, I remember him. His skills are really good, and he has all kinds of strange assassination methods at his fingertips. At that time, he brought us a lot of trouble, and because of that, many Light Knights died. Hiss. His words paused, and he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The giant axe's defense had been broken, and another wound had appeared on Carl's chest, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Carl didn't get angry. He took a step back as if he didn't feel anything and temporarily hid behind the chain. He raised his giant axe and said, "Tang in? Well, I believe you can also see that it wasn't my axe that killed him. Who is it? Yes. Hee, I think we need to stop fighting first, and then we can all sit down and discuss things properly." Carl chuckled. Since he was sure that there was something fishy going on, he naturally wanted to use this opportunity to negotiate terms. However, the corner of Tang Un's mouth twitched. "I think you've misunderstood something. This is not a deal. It's an order. You have no choice if you don't want to be tortured to extort a confession." Carl's smile froze when he heard this. This was indeed the case. With Tang Un's strength, the reason why he let them live until now was nothing more than to capture them alive and torture them to extort a confession. Therefore, whether they spoke now or not, it really didn't affect Tang In. He waved his axe and roared, "Don't go too far, Sir Tang In. If we kill ourselves now, you won't get anything." The attack continued. Tang In glanced indifferently. "You can try. Let's see if it's faster for you to commit suicide or for me to attack. You mother of asterisk cur." Carl stopped cursing halfway and looked at each other helplessly. They absolutely couldn't beat him. As for suicide, not to mention whether they were willing or not, with the terrifying attack speed displayed by the other party, they really didn't have the confidence to succeed in killing themselves. As a martial artist, they didn't even have the right to kill themselves. What kind of grievance and sorrow was this? F***CKUN. Carl spat out a mouthful of blood. A ferocious look flashed across his face as if he had decided on something. He simply said, "Anyway, I've had enough of being a lackey. Even if I die in your hands, it's not a shame. All right, the killer is called Reiser. He's a holy head knight, but he was transferred back to the temple 2 days ago." As soon as he finished speaking, he gripped his axe tightly and stared at Tang Un's every move. His expression was extremely nervous. "I've said everything that needs to be said. Don't forget, you promised to be reasonable." "Reiser, and thank you." Tang In nodded non-committally and thanked him politely. Then, the blade light suddenly became more intense. He no longer held back and instantly pressed down like a storm. "You F***king broke your promise." With a furious roar, Carl was like an enraged bull. His fierce-looking face instantly turned red as he madly swung his axe to meet the attack head-on. With a calm voice, he said, "Sorry, I didn't make it clear before. Actually, I prefer to reason with a dagger. F***CK your mother. Use your ultimate move and kill him." Carl brazenly took a step forward as if he wanted to block all the attacks with his own strength. Then, he placed his hopes on the leather-armored youth's ultimate move. Of course, Carl would definitely not be able to hold on for long. Seeing this, the leather-armored youth did not have time to think. He took a step back, took a deep breath, and raised his arm. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Amidst the piercing sound, the green chain instantly drew a strange arc in the air. It rapidly gathered and spun like a giant green python coiled in the air, suppressing the surroundings. Without accumulating power, there was no extra time to do so. In the next moment, the coiled green python tilted and pressed forward like a toppling mountain of gold and jade pillars. The tip of the spindle-shaped chain hit its head with an ear-piercing hiss. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived above Tang Un's head with an intimidating momentum. However, before the chain could reach him, the axe flew out with a whoosh. Then, with a loud laugh, Carl, who was originally covered in blood, suddenly flew out in the air. Although blood was spurting out of his mouth and his body was like a broken water bag, his expression was unusually happy, like a weasel who had succeeded in his evil plan and finally jumped into the henhouse. Feeling the aftershock in his palm, Tang In narrowed his eyes and looked at Carl, who flew out of the wall with the axe, with an indifferent expression. Just now, Carl suddenly smashed the axe at a close distance and then pounced on him. It seemed to be a desperate move, but in fact Carl did not use any strength. Instead, he took advantage of the great force of Tang Un's slap to fly back and successfully escaped from the battle. Of course, if it was a normal time, such a small trick would not be able to delay for a long time. And with Tang Un's abnormal speed, it was meaningless. But now it was different. Don't forget that the leather-armored youth's ultimate move was above Tang Un's head. The two sides were bound to be entangled for a while. In other words, Carl not only schemed against Tang Un, but also schemed against the leather-armored youth. He was vicious and merciless, cunning and cunning. Withdrawing his gaze, Tang Un did not immediately chase after him as Carl expected. His figure swayed slightly, and he avoided the chain darts that went straight down. Boom! The green light burst out, and the rows of floor collapsed instantly. "Damn you!" Roar. The leather-armored youth cursed angrily. Seeing Carl fly out of the wall, he naturally understood that he was used as a scapegoat. However, he really had no other choice now. He could only brace himself and roar, waving his hands quickly. The coiled green python in the air instantly pressed down, and the chains crisscrossed like an inescapable net, sealing a large area around him. The sure kill skill of the giant python was never its bloody mouth, but a heavy strangulation skill. But now, seeing Tang Un walking calmly in the dense chains, moving and dodging, as if he was taking a stroll, completely ignoring the heavy pressure around him, the leather-armored youth's last hope was gone. The last trace of hope in the young man's heart disappeared. His face was ashen as he knew that he was finished. In the alley outside the wall, Carl fell to the ground and rolled. He did not dare to hesitate and immediately rushed forward. But there was something in front of him. Whoosh! It flew over his head and with a bang, smashed a hole in the ground of the alley. It was Carl's single-handed, short-handled giant axe. Carl could not help but be happy. He did not expect that the giant axe, which he originally intended to abandon, would fly out from the same direction as him, and coincidentally fall in front of him. It was naturally good to be able to get back the weapon. After all, it was an extra layer of protection. But before Carl rushed over, a small white hand grabbed the handle of the axe first. It was a girl about 10 years old. Her head was lowered, and her figure was slender. She was wearing a white floral dress, like a velvet flower in the wind. Looking at her, one could not help but feel tender affection for her. Even though Carl was running for his life, he could not help but chuckle. While running, he stretched out his big hand and said, "Oh, this is not something a little girl should hold." His body instantly tensed up and his eyes bulged. In his sight, the little girl easily picked up a giant axe that weighed hundreds of kilograms. Her slender arm and the exaggerated blade formed a strong visual conflict. She slightly raised her head, and with a cold expression, raised her hand, and a snowflake blade light flashed up. Slash! It was as simple as cutting a vegetable with a sharp knife. Carl only felt that his sight suddenly went up and down, left and right. The blue sky and white clouds, the complex alley. The leather-armored youth in the distant square fell to the ground with his hand covering his throat, and several figures were rushing here. Finally, with a bang, the dust settled, and he saw a familiar headless body spurting blood. He also saw the little girl in white throw away the giant axe and hit the body. Then, she looked at him indifferently. "What is going on?" "You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.